Yeah, Bob. You remember Bob, the guy that's gonna launch a nuclear attack? You got any more abuse you want to hurl my way? Or are you ready to go in here and take care of Bob?
What do you propose, Bob?
When in doubt, C4.
Hey there, YouTuber camper friends of mine. It's your favorite geeky Star Wars penguin, Bob here. And we are continuing on with our series for the next several weeks of Star Wars on Trial. This is a rewatch of when Film Threat, helmed by Chris Gore, when he, a couple months ago, decided to put the Disney Lucasfilm on trial for the murder of the Star Wars IP. So I decided that I hadn't watched a lot of these, so I decided to go ahead and rewatch them and actually give my penguin thoughts on them as we go along. So we're going to get in here, and today we've already done all the charges, and then last week we did count 1. This week is on count 2 of the charges that Disney Lucasfilm is accused of by putting to death the Star Wars franchise. So let's get into it, shall we? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just start watching this, and then we'll pause it periodically and talk about things and so forth. And looks like this one's 2 hours and 14 minutes in length. Once again, the description to this original video up on Film Threat's YouTube channels down in the description, as well as where you can find filmthreat.com and also the documentation. Like, for example, the court documents, there's a link there in the description down there where you can pull this up, the Google Doc. That looks very professional in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a penguin. But nevertheless, I have seen enough legal documents in my life that this looks legit. So anyway, let's go ahead and start watching it. I'm not going to read that because more than likely the special advisor to the court, Alan Ng, will probably read them. Okay, here we go. Can't wait. Let me hide the chat replay here. Okay, there we go. This is the Film Threat YouTube channel, by the way, I'm watching this on. I am also using a profanity filter because I don't care for the profanity that may be in this. I don't know if there is any or not, so you'll see subtitles, and it will bleep out wherever it is. Oh, course starting. There's the Honorable Judge.
You may be seated. This is episode 3 of the trial of Disney Lucasfilm for the murder of the Star Wars franchise. Charges were introduced a few weeks ago. Mr. Ng, what charges will we be discussing today?
We will be discussing count number 2, the film threat jury on behalf of the citizens of the Star Wars fandom charges Lucasfilm Disney for the offense of fraudulent misuse of canon on or about the 30th day of October 2012.
There it
Lucasfilm Disney did unethically and fraudulently misuse canon to change the mythology of Star Wars to fit particular narratives. They allowed Kathleen Kennedy to mandate that the Force is female and rewrite historical Star Wars events, removing instances she deemed problematic, such as Slave Leia, Slave One, and positive male role models. This created more canon issues than what would have been created through interesting storytelling.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. And a reminder to our jury, you are to listen to the evidence on both sides of the defense and the prosecution.
That's what we're here for.
You should keep an open mind.
Yep.
And court is now in session.
I want to hear both sides of the argument. I do like this animation they started with. Mickey's paws and a TIE fighter. Making shadows. And I'm going to pause through the music there because...
Mr. Ng,
Wait a minute. There we go.
Mr. Ng, today, as always, we are joined by Mr. Todd Blackwood.
Ooh, I like him.
Mr. Blackwood is our court sketch artist.
Yeah,
he will
really
be
good,
providing sketches of those presenting for the defense and the prosecution today. And you can follow Mr. Blackwood on his Instagram at BlackwoodPDX. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, for providing some much-needed levity to these very serious proceedings. We're about to bring on...
Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that you instruct the jury to slap that like button and subscribe to the Film Threat YouTube channel.
Yes, your motion has been accepted. Please smash.
I encourage you to go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe on the Film Threat channel for this, as well as on my channel if you would. It really helps especially the like. Really helps the dynamics of everything on YouTube, and help me get more penguin action out there in the penguin verse. Anyway,
the like button. We've got nearly 500 people now watching live. Smash the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. If you would like to continue to follow this case. Today we are discussing Count 2.
Count 2, fraudulent misuse of canon.
And now we will be joined by the members of the prosecution for today's proceedings. Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett.
Ooh, Robert Meyer Burnett.
Thank you for joining us today.
It's an important issue to be discussing, and I'm happy to be here. The cultural vandalism that has been shown by the Disney Corporation cannot stand, and I'm here to hopefully defend imagination connoisseurs the world over.
Thank you for your presence today, Mr. Burnett.
For the prosecution.
Mr. Steiner, we're having some technical issues earlier. Mr. Steiner, can you hear us? Okay. Mr. Steiner is here. He is working out some technical issues.
Yeah,
and it's
I
not
know all about the technical issues.
you sound like a robot, which would be perfect if droids were a part of this trial. I assume at some point droids will be. You're having some technical issues.
Droids.
Why don't you leave and
Better
come
not
back,
put my
and
favorite
we'll get back to
R2D2 on
you.
trial, though.
On the defense, we have Mr. Ozark. Matt, is it Ozark Matt or Matt Ozark?
Ozark Matt, Your Honor. Thank you.
Ozark Matt, Mr. Matt.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today. We have Become the Knight.
Hey, how are we doing today?
On the defense, thank you. I would have expected you to be wearing a blazer,
The only
sports
one
jacket.
know
I will
here is,
accept this.
Robert Meyer Burnett.
That's a very
I
nice
don't know him, but I've watched some of
wine-colored
his stuff
shirt.
before.
Thank you for your.
Thank you,
normally
Your
really
Honor.
good about Star Trek.
Forgive the weight gain. None of my blazers fit me anymore. In my profession, leather jackets are the preferred outerwear.
Well, look, I appreciate you making the effort and also joining us as a witness today for the defense.
Oh, I know Chato as well.
Rocking the beige is Mr. Chato.
Yes, I'd just like to say that Alan's last name could use some vowels.
We've all thought that.
I object, Your Honor. My last
Sorry.
name has the right amount of vowels.
Which is 0.
Sure it does, Alan.
Okay. Before we get started, a reminder again to the jury to listen to both sides, and here's how this is going to work. We'll have approximately a 30-minute total presentation from the prosecution first, and then the defense, who will discuss count number 2, which Mr. Ng read at the top of these proceedings. After the prosecution presents its case, up to 30 minutes-ish, and I will be fairly liberal about the amount of time. The defense will then have their opportunity. We will have a brief recess and then move on to open debate for the last half of today's court
I'll probably
proceedings.
take a break around during the recess time
On the
as well.
prosecution, who would like to go first?
We haven't discussed this, but my esteemed colleague certainly can go first if he chooses to.
We have lost your esteemed colleague, so that means you, Mr. Burnett, are up. You're up first. Mr. Ng is here to support on the prosecution. Mr. Burnett on the charge of fraudulent misuse of canon. Please present your argument.
Here we go.
Well, first of all, one of the things that Disney did when they purchased Lucasfilm, and I would like to point out, first of all, that George Lucas bought, he was paid by Disney for just over $4 billion for the franchise. He was paid $2.21 billion in cash by Disney, and he was also paid 37,076,679 shares of Disney stock.
Wow.
If you just round that down to 37 million, today the Disney stock price means that George Lucas was actually paid $5,404,000,000. So George Lucas has made an extra $1.4 billion on the deal, which means Disney continues to pay George Lucas in his stock dividends and money. I would like that to go on the record, please, as showing that Mr. Lucas is continuing to handsomely.
And imagine just how much more George Lucas would have been making if Disney stock would be good right now. Because with everything they're doing with their stock and with the company itself, and being extremely woke and putting all this politics in all their content and so forth, their stock has started to plummet seriously bad. They are crashing and burning. And needless to say, I'm guessing George Lucas is probably not happy with not only what they did to his beloved franchise, which I don't know if he actually cares or not. I would think he would, but either way, I'm guessing the thing he probably does care about is the fact that half the deal was supposed to be his stock, and now his stock is starting to turn into pretty much worthless because of what they did to the Star Wars franchise. That's just my opinion. Anyway, we'll continue on.
Benefit from Disney's payment of Star Wars. And I would like to say also for the record that if you ever paid $5.4 billion for something, I would think that being the custodian of whatever it is that you paid for would be of the utmost importance to you, to make sure the value of something you paid that much money for was protected at all costs. Unfortunately, I don't see that as the case, and Disney shareholders should be very aware of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the very first things that Disney did when they took over Star Wars is they eliminated the expanded universe. And the expanded universe, according to Lucasfilm, was considered canon. The books were considered canon up to the point that Disney took possession of them. For instance, Cobb Vanth, while actually he was in a novel that was published by Disney, even Disney couldn't keep it straight. In the Aftermath novels, Cobb Vanth's history backstory was changed when we saw him in The Mandalorian, which already Disney couldn't keep their own canon straight.
Yeah, and I find that interesting because Cobb Vanth was in the Clone Wars. I loved him. I love that character in the Clone Wars. It was cool to see him in live action in The Mandalorian as well. But yeah, like he said, they changed his backstory a little bit, which is really kind of odd for them to do that. On a different note, I am currently right now reading through, it's been literally decades since I read it, but the Timothy Zahn series, Heir to the Empire. I'm currently reading that right now and going through it because it deals with, supposedly, the Ahsoka series is supposed to be an adaptation of that with Grand Admiral Thrawn in it and so forth. Although, obviously, they're doing that with Ahsoka, I guess, and Sabine, instead of Han, Luke, and Leia, like it is in the book. Speaking of which, later on tonight, I will be going live again on this channel to give my live review of season 1, episode 3 of the Ahsoka series. So let's look for that later on tonight. All right, let's continue on.
But getting rid of all of Star Wars canon from the expanded universe, and then later cherry picking that canon, taking characters, taking situations, things that they just chose to use, whether Dave Filoni wanted to do it or whether whoever wanted to do it. They've been doing that, and by doing so, they've both diminished the canon that Lucasfilm had created with their great literary works for the last 30 years, and also I find it inexplicable that not only did they render the books non-canon, but then they've gone back in and tried to make them canon again, but changed.
Yeah,
that shows immediately how something that they did as soon as they took possession of the franchise, that they first laid down the law and then completely went back on what they were doing with the canon of Star Wars. Now, admittedly, this was canon that appeared in literary form and video game form and not necessarily on screen, but it was definitely considered canon by Lucasfilm that Disney later changed. I think the most egregious example of changing canon shows up in the final Skywalker saga film, The Rise of Skywalker. That would be Chief Palpatine's return. As we see in that film, the first thing we learn as we watch The Rise of Skywalker is the dead speak. The dead speak. Well, I guess we've seen Force ghosts speak and all of that, but they don't exactly broadcast their voices to the galaxy. In this case, we have Emperor Palpatine, who we saw definitively destroyed at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
He was thrown over a railing by Darth Vader in the Imperial chambers. The Death Star exploded, and he was definitively dead. Ah, well, not according to J.J. Abrams and The Rise of Skywalker. They bring back Sheev Palpatine, inexplicably so. We don't know how he came back, where he came back from. I would say that that's one of the most not only egregious canon violations in any medium, but perhaps the most egregious canon violation in any motion picture ever made.
Yeah, they
sure,
never
having
really
characters
explained
come
how he
back
came
from the
back.
dead is a time-worn
What
trope
happened?
of science fiction, fantasy, and horror material. But let me just say that at least we get some kind of plausible explanation. But in this film, not so much. For a space fantasy like Star Wars, to strain credulity in this manner is something that I've never seen before. And it certainly was unearned. It's something that was beneath the franchise and even beneath a filmmaker that I hold in not very high esteem, like J.J. Abrams, who violated the Star Trek canon over and over again. So why it's surprising to see that he brings back Sheev Palpatine in Rise of Skywalker for no reason at all other than just to do it should not be surprising to anyone. Also, let me just point out that with the shoddy treatment that the Star Trek franchise was given, I don't quite understand why J.J. Abrams was seen as being the golden boy of the Star Wars franchise over at Disney, but be that as it may. So for my first evidentiary entrance into the record, I want to use not just the Legends stories, but Sheev Palpatine would be my first example of a canon violation in Disney Star Wars.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure it made a lot of
And
sense.
I don't know if my esteemed colleague is back.
Your colleague is having some technical issues. You have extra time, Mr. Burnett, and I know some people are going to accuse me of being biased in this trial. I'm no more or less biased in this trial than a Supreme Court justice who is biased. So there you go. We're even getting comments. We're live also on Rumble, I might add. You may continue with extra time. You have at least another 10 or 15 minutes, Mr. Burnett. I have watched you many times on live streams that have gone
All right, then.
countless hours. So it's unfortunate. This is why we have a prosecution team. Unless Mr. Ng would like to add, you do have extra time, Mr. Burnett.
Well, let's okay. Let's go on to talk about the actual. Let's talk about The Force Awakens for a minute. In The Force Awakens, we are supposed to believe at the end of Return of the Jedi, the galaxy has been liberated from the stranglehold of the Empire. The Emperor has been defeated. Vader has been defeated. And Luke has finally made the transition to becoming a full Jedi Knight. When we begin, if you're, say, 6 or 7 and you're watching Star Wars for the first time and your parents have taken you all the way through episodes 1 through 6 and you sit down to watch episode 7, what are you left with except as a 7 or 8-year-old dealing with the fact that your heroes that you followed, well, for 6 movies have been completely discredited and destroyed. Most specifically, the character of R2-D2. R2-D2 spends the entirety of The Force Awakens under a tarp, off in a corner, in the base of the now Resistance. I don't know what they're resisting. I don't know what incompetent boobs allowed the First Order to rise up and build a super weapon in striking distance within the heart of the Republic.
Let me just say this. I was not happy when I found out in The Force Awakens that R2-D2 was just basically powered off and under a tarp the whole time. He's my all-time favorite Star Wars character, and they treat him like he's a piece of useless old tech. that's sitting over collecting dust. Seriously? I don't understand it. Above all things, that right there just really irked me a lot. Anyway, let's get back to it. But I feel like I had to say something about R2-D2. He's got to be my favorite. I love how he's kind of like the unsung hero of a lot of the things that happen in Star Wars. Not to mention he's very much comic relief. I love it. To his straight man C-3PO. But for them to treat him like they did, I just don't understand why. What's the point? They were maybe trying to replace him with BB-8, I guess. But that's just kind of silly and stupid, in my opinion. Simply because, 6 solid movies and all this content of even the Clone Wars and so forth has R2-D2 in it. R2-D2 and C-3PO have been the two main droids of the whole Star Wars universe. And to shelve them by putting them in a corner on a tarp, I just don't get it. It's like removing and changing Luke, Leia, and Han's relationship. It's pointless. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Anyway, now that I've did my little penguin rant, let's continue on with what R&B's got to say.
I don't understand anything about the Millennium Falcon sitting on some lost world of Jakku, somehow being liberated from the possession of Han Solo. I don't understand any of that. None of that is necessarily a canon violation. It just makes little to no sense in any kind of storytelling capacity whatsoever. I don't even know why anybody would turn that in as a first draft script, much shoot it, and much less sit in an edit bay and say to themselves, oh, this is good. Now, of course, it made $2 billion, so what do I know? But what I would like to say also is that we have seen the ways of the Force in the first 6 Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
Now we are presented with a character named Rey. We don't know who she really is. We don't know where she's from. We do know she can certainly know her way around a crashed Star Destroyer, which is fine. She's probably gone all through that because she's a scavenger and that's how she makes her living. However, we learned from Han Solo that traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops. Well, I would say that Rey has not done much more than dust crops in the sand dunes of Jakku. And yet, the first time she's behind the throttle of the Millennium Falcon, she's able to pilot the Millennium Falcon better than Han Solo could. Maneuvering, making maneuvers through the Star Destroyer as if she was born to it. And apparently she was, because she was born to everything. She was born to wielding a lightsaber. She was apparently born to be best pilot in the galaxy. She's also born to be the best desert scavenger. And I would say that one of the best things about the Star Wars franchise, especially the original trilogy, is the idea that the Force surrounds us and binds us. But you're not just tapped into it. You might be Force sensitive, yes, but in order to control the Force or use it to give you abilities, you have to study the Force. You have to train the Force, or with the Force. You have to be, it's not something that just shows up. And I would say that Rey, knowing how to pilot the Millennium Falcon, I don't know if you could say it breaks canon. It's just simply unbelievable. It's simply something that shatters the illusion of verisimilitude and shatters the idea of suspension of disbelief for an audience. How is it she's able to fly the Millennium Falcon? She's never been, first of all, it was hard enough for me to learn to drive a car when I'm sitting off center. But if you're sitting off center in a Carillion freighter, how are you supposed to be able to maneuver? That's got to be a tough job. We've never seen her behind the wheel of any kind of a ship, much less the Falcon. And a ship that's been souped up for speed and maneuverability. And yet she sits behind those controls as if born to it. This is not what Star Wars tells us. You might be born to something, but you have to work for it. You have to study it. You have to channel it. This is, I would say, ultimately a canon violation because Rey is shown to be strong with the Force. But before she even knows she is, she's already performing miracles. Yeah. Even Jesus be 30 years old before he's turning water into wine. This is not something that happens normally. And for me, for this aging Star Wars fan, I found it quite offensive. It destroys the entire lessons of the first 3 films of the trilogy. I mean,
Luke
it made me
didn't start off
feel
to be this
entitled,
great
not
Jedi
unlike Gen Z is, to get everything they
episode
want,
4.
whenever they want it. And that's what Rey is. She's the perfect example of the modern age. Everybody's entitled to get whatever they want. Hey, if you want to fly a Corellian freighter, go right ahead. You're going to be great at it. If you want to, I don't know, wield a lightsaber, go ahead and do that too. You go ahead and you take on somebody who's been studying with the Force and who's powerful with the dark side. You can just wield a saber as well as he can. In fact, you can match him blow for blow in battle. This in itself is a violation of Star Wars canon. This takes everything we've learned from Yoda and tosses it aside. And this is only in the first film of the Disney trilogy. Who allowed this to pass? Who allowed anyone to tell this story? Well, you know, everybody at Disney did. From the executives on high to the marketing people who didn't have a problem with any of that. I don't know why. Writing a character that is perfect with no flaws goes against drama. It goes against everything we know about great storytelling. So I guess I would enter in Rey Palpatine herself as a. And by the way, speaking of canon violations, when exactly was Sheev Palpatine around? Who was Rey's mother? Do we know this?
That's a good question
Who
too.
bedded down with Sheev to create Rey? Is she a clone? What is she? Do we know? I don't know. I don't remember hearing about it. But to me, is she an immaculate conception? Is she supposed to be space? I don't know.
Jar Jar.
But these things are terrible. Maybe Jar Jar was the father. That would explain a lot. I mean, Jar Jar might be the unsung hero of Star Wars, or the evil villain. But anyway, Your Honor, that's what I have right now.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Your colleague, Mr. Steiner, has seemed to have fixed his internet issues. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Burnett. People in the chat apparently love you, and you're getting a lot of support.
He used to work on it.
And we're going to see. We haven't seen the defense case. Mr. Steiner, are you prepared for your presentation? Unfortunately, because of your absence, most of your time was taken up by Mr. Burnett. You've got limited time. Please cut to the salient argument for the prosecution side of your case.
This.
Oh, you're muted. You need to unmute your mic.
This guy.
It says your mic isn't connected. While you're fixing your technical issues,
just now,
I'm going to go to our sketch artist, Mr. Blackwood is
he's the best.
All right, I'm going to read some super chats while you solve your technical issues. We have a few here very quickly. Hulk Hogan's giant taint for 5 says, thanks for doing something different, presenting how Disney imploded Star Wars. Thank you, Mr. Hulk Hogan's giant. You may object back, Darth Maul and Joe Ungled Cannon. Why does
Just what George Lucas.
Okay, wait a minute.
Rebut that, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, let's Mr. Burnett, if you could rebut that
As usual,
last
I like
comment.
to skip through the super chats.
That's just what George.
Because I'm more into finding out what the prosecution and the defense is saying, or what the judge has to say, and even what Alan Ng's got to say, and so forth. I'm more interested in the court side of it. Even though I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a penguin that's a Star Wars fan. Mainly of the OG Star Wars stuff under Lucas. Yeah, he's on there, but he's apparently having technical difficulties as well. I mean, at the beginning of this, he was there drawing and stuff, and then they tried to highlight him, and poof, he went away. I don't know. They're having some technical difficulties. Him and one of the prosecutors, Chris Steiner. So basically, what you've missed so far is Robert Meyer Burnett has been the sole person for the prosecution and talking about the two things This week's about the fraudulent misuse of canon. Yeah, I could blame something that is recorded a couple months ago. Exactly. I am glad that they left it unedited, just like I did my last week's one, simply because it kind of gives, in my opinion, it gives a more realistic feel to this. I mean, because if you've ever gone, I mean, I've been in, not that I'd want anybody really to be in court, unless I guess you're a lawyer, and it's your job, but I've been in court proceedings where they've had technical issues before. And it's a very real thing, and I'm glad to see that that's kind of, not that I want them to have technical problems, but I'm glad to see that they're leaving that in here and showing that, so forth. But nevertheless, the two things so far that Robert Meyer Burnett for the prosecution has stated that is a problem for the misuse of canon for the prosecution is the brought back Palpatine when clearly in the end of Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader threw him down in that big long shaft at the same time that the Death Star 2 was actually destroyed. So it's like how, and they never explained how he came back, or they did in Rise of Skywalker, but they brought Palpatine back, which kind of breaks canon. Also, the fact that that George Lucas, when he was in charge of Star Wars, he said that the books are from the expanded universe, like the Timothy Zahn book that I'm reading on Heir of the Empire, is canon. He considered those canon, and also some of the video games and so forth. And the first thing that Disney Lucasfilm says when they take control of it is that the EU is no longer canon. Yet they can cherry pick what they want out of it to get certain characters or do wherever they want to make the franchise their own, I guess. But in the process, they're breaking Star Wars canon. And he mentioned that, as well as he mentioned that's Rey Skywalker, which I never even thought about this before, but there's two things. One of them made me mad was the fact that they, in The Force Awakens, R2-D2 spent that whole time under a tarp powered down, collecting dust. My favorite Star Wars character of all time, R2-D2, and they treat him like an old piece of tech collecting dust in the corner. I just don't understand that one. It didn't make any sense to me either. But then also with Rey Skywalker, which kind of violates canon in the fact that all of a sudden she can pretty much do anything. That she doesn't have to go through any type of training to wield a lightsaber or to have discipline to study the Force. Has no real journey to arrive to what she can and can't do. Han made the phrase in, I forget which movie it is, that flying a starship is not like dusting crops, boy. Told that to Luke. And yet Rey has spent this whole time on Tatooine, never once flying a starship, maybe doing crop dusting, I don't know, but nevertheless, the first time we see her flying the Millennium Falcon, she's an excellent pilot, weaving in and out of the Star Destroyer that she scavenged and so forth. I don't know. It makes it not necessarily, that part doesn't break canon like you said, but that it is unbelievable. The part to me that breaks canon is the fact that where is the process that she learned to control the Force? Because Luke spent almost all of episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, on Dagobah with Yoda, learning how to discipline himself to control the Force. It's not something that just comes easy to you. You have to learn about it. You have to kind of commune with the Force. You have to kind of have discipline about how you use it. And that's some of the points that Robert Meyer Burnett was making here. So anyway, let's continue on with watching what he's got to say. I was just trying to bring you up to speed a little bit, Tracy, to see to let you know what you kind of missed so far. But let's continue on with what he's got to say here, because I'm guessing the other prosecutor. Yeah, no problem. I'm guessing Chris Steiner's probably still got technical issues, and I really hope Mr. Blackwood makes it back because I'll be honest with you, I like the hearing both sides of the argument, but I really am enjoying Mr. Blackwood. He's good stuff. Anyway, let's go on.
Lucas wrote. He doesn't have to explain everything. I mean, why does Leia remember her mother? She's force sensitive. She imprinted on her. She imprinted a memory on her that never left. That's why she has images of her mother in her memory.
Mr. Blackwood's back.
And as for people keeping their same names, well, if there's a bright center of the universe, Tatooine is the planet that it's furthest from. No one would ever believe that anybody would even look out there. Unless, of course, you were a pod racer and you traveled to go to the Boonta Eve pod race all the time. Maybe you'd run into someone with the same name. But really, do pod racers run in the same circles as the Empire or Dark Lords of the Sith? I would say people just kept their own names because that's who they were. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's keeping your identity. And as we know, keeping your identity is oh so important these days.
Let's thank you, Mr. Burnett, for that rebut on the comment. Mr. Steiner, for the prosecution, you've got mere minutes now before we move to the defense, but if you could just cut to the chase on the salient points of your argument, keeping your camera off may help with the internet. Mr. Steiner, you have the floor. Mr. Steiner? Mr. Steiner, as put forth in the instructions that were emailed, you need to be prepared for court.
Welcome.
I don't hear you. I don't see you.
Because in the original script,
we're going to have to move
Jedi,
on to the defense.
Mentioned in the novelization,
and I'm sorry,
but
who on the defense would like to go first
baby.
in their presentation?
Hiding with her mother.
I can go first, Your Honor.
Young.
Our
Okay.
court sketch artist, Mr. Blackwood. Well, there you are. Who can go first? Become the Knight. Was that you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. I'll just call you Mr. Knight if you don't mind.
I do know that the George Lucas himself did consider the books that you're talking about, like the novels and stuff. He considered those canon, and actually, that's one of the points that right here that the prosecution is trying to make. That Disney Lucasfilm, when they took over Star Wars, they decanonized all the EU, the expanded universe, and the books and so forth. But yet they still went about cherry picking characters and things that they wanted out of it. Oh, yeah, okay. I forgot about that. You're right. As she even says in the movie that she died when I was very young, meaning she wasn't a baby. Exactly. Yes. Anyway, so let's continue on watching. Thanks for your input. I love it. That's what I want to see. I'm here to listen to both sides of the prosecution and also the defense, and anything that the chat, aka the jury, that I'm a member of as well, what we have to think about things too. The novelization, The Return of the Jedi in 1983, was based on the final version of the script before shooting. Yeah, see, in a way, that kind of tells us also that they kind of had a plan back then. Shocking, right? That they kind of knew what they were doing, or that George Lucas had an idea where he was going with things. Even using some of the novels to gain information or things. You know, and he proved that even when he was involved in the Clone Wars. Some of the stuff in it is in some of those books from the EU as well. Anyway, let's continue on. Let's hear what the defense has got to say. Right, some of the stuff got cut, but when Lucas went back to the prequels, he either forgot that stuff or just changed things without considering the connection. It's possible. And it may be one of those things that with the prequels that he decided he wanted to go in a different direction with things. Obviously, I think also some of that was what I see the prequels are, is he was really laser focused on the story of Anakin and how he eventually becomes Darth Vader. Everything else around it was just kind of fluff, if that makes sense. At least that's where I see it at, because it feels like that the first three movies, the prequels, are all that Anakin is key to everything. They even call him the chosen one. Anyway, let's continue on.
It's fine.
That is a very smart shirt to wear to wine tasting. So there you are.
And the Star of David guitar in the back. It's kind of cool.
I don't know this
Oh,
guy.
that's actually you talking about this guy here?
Yeah.
That's a cool guitar, though.
I put it more forward because it kind of looks Star Warsy.
Oh, yeah.
It does look Star
like the
Wars.
Millennium Falcon, a TIE fighter, and a Stormtrooper had a baby.
I'd say it reminded me of a TIE fighter with like the
I
black
object
panels
relevance.
on it. That's a cool guitar.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I
Mr.
yield.
Knight, we have now pivoted to the defense. The floor is yours. Combined, we've got 30 minutes for the defense until we go to open debate. Please proceed, and remember to leave time for Mr. Matt and Mr. Chato.
Absolutely.
And WDW Pro has joined us. Is WDW Pro here on part of the defense as a witness?
Mr. Pro is reporting for duty as a witness for the defense, yes.
Thank you,
Wow.
Mr. Pro.
We got witnesses.
All right, I could say WDW Pro. Please proceed, Mr. Knight, and thank you for your
That's a
presence
mouthful.
in court today.
WDW Pro.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I share my screen with the stream? Because I have a slide presentation.
Yes, let's go to if you
got
there, you should see you should be presented at the very bottom of the screen with a series of options, and one should say present.
There we go.
There you go.
Is that on stream now?
It is now. Yes. Please
Okay.
proceed with your presentation, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, just to quickly go through some rebuttals to the charges, this is partially addressing some of the initial charges that were a part of the initial draft before it was rewritten as well. To the point that the Force is female, this never manifested itself in any substantial way in the movies. It may be ideological pandering through marketing and PR, but does not manifestly infringe on canon. I'd argue this should be applied to count 4, malicious introduction of current-day politics. The second point, if people have said the Force was reduced to superpowers by Disney, I would argue George Lucas allowed the Force to resemble superpowers during the prequels, featuring bloated, impossible lightsaber fights. He moved away from training and mysticism of the original trilogy and exchanged them for spectacle. The philosophy behind the Force was disregarded. Another common complaint from people who want to see Disney found guilty. George Lucas ruined the philosophy of the Force in the prequels through the introduction of midichlorians, making one's relationship to the Force scientific, not spiritual or mystical. George Lucas also altered the philosophy of the Force regarding light versus dark side. In Empire, you have the contrast of Yoda lifting the X-Wing on Dagobah versus Vader throwing debris at Luke on Cloud City when they finally face off.
Yeah.
This was intended to be a direct contrast, showing how the same Force ability, moving objects, is used differently by light and dark. To quote Yoda, "A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. In Empire, Luke only fights Vader because he is ensnared by him while attempting to rescue his friends. In Jedi, Luke seeks out Vader to turn him to the light side peacefully. He only attacks Vader when it is revealed he is giving in to the dark side." The idea that light side valued knowledge and defense while dark side valued attack was blatantly dismantled in the prequels. Now for my arguments. George Lucas fraudulently misused canon in his own universe. He killed Star Wars well before it ever made its way to Disney, and you can't kill what's already dead. George Lucas added plenty of canon that retroactively made action or lack of action by characters unwise or stupid. Subsection 1. Force Pool was added in Empire when Luke pulls his lightsaber from the snow in the Wampa Cave. That being the case, in the previous movie, in Episode 4, when the Millennium Falcon is parked, and you see here we have these 2 stormtroopers out here. Hey, can you give us a hand with this? They walk up, and the audience hears blaster fire. blaster fire is very loud and is not as silent as using force pull to pull their guns out of their hands. Seems like, that's a little bit canon disruptive, but nothing too crazy. But it's not really a smart action given the canon that was added in the next movie. We complain about Obi-Wan meeting Leia in the Disney Plus series. Why wouldn't Leia grade him differently in her message if they had an extended adventure together? Pardon me, I'm sorry. We forgot that George Lucas set this precedent of not remembering people, or remembering people they're not supposed to remember. In Jedi, Leia recounts remembering her mother, though Padme died moments after birth. Anakin built C-3PO as a child to help his mother, and C-3PO serves Padme through the Clone Wars up until her death. Anakin should be intimately familiar with this droid, though he doesn't recognize him in Cloud City, as we see here before Han Solo is frozen in carbonite. In The Phantom Menace, the first action scenes shows Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon escaping the droids using force speed. It's the only ability they have to get them out of trouble. This ability is extremely useful when, say, your master is in a one-on-one battle with a Sith, and he decides not to use it because of plot. Point B. George Lucas altered established canon in the original trilogy. Even Disney has not had the gall to do that. George Lucas created the infamous Han shot first controversy. I assume we're all familiar with this for the sake of time. I can move past it, but we know this is a very egregious violation in the eyes of the fans. The entirety of the special editions was an affront to Star Wars affront to the Star Wars movies the fans grew up with for almost 2 decades, changing classic movies that defined a genre and redefined blockbusters in service of George's own ego. He then rubbed salt in the wounds of the fandom by removing the original theatrical releases from market, very literally attempting to erase history. George Lucas made the Star Wars Holiday Special immediately following the first Star Wars movie. He's
talking about it.
I don't know that it really needs elaboration. It's a massive eyesore in the Star Wars canon. And as we can see here, a lot of my defense is a prosecution of George Lucas, which it will come full circle, I promise you. If we are going to prosecute George Lucas instead of Disney, it would be important to note that he admitted to conspiracy to tamper evidence, quote, "If I had time and a hammer, I'd track down every bootleg copy of the Star Wars Holiday Special, and I would smash it."
We don't talk about Fight Club.
Now to point 2. We grant George some level of levity, correct? Because Star Wars is science fantasy, so there's some wiggle room for imagination and play. Canon can be convenient to serve the momentary plot, and let's not forget the rule of cool. Is it cool? Let's get our imaginations alive and jumping. Let's go wow. George added force pull in the Wampa Cave, and it was an exciting moment. It showed us how much Luke had grown in dramatic fashion and made us wonder what else the Force was capable of. And even the moment in the previous movie was served better by having only the blaster sound. You save on production costs by not having to write a whole scene. It snappily happens, and they walk out in the stormtrooper outfits. You get enough in that small moment to understand what happened, and it moves the story along. And we forgive that. George never intended Luke and Leia to be siblings. In his original 9 movie outlines, George had planned for Luke to seek out his sister, who was not Leia, in a later film. Leia was meant to be an isolated monarch, and Han was supposed to die in Episode 6. Due to the stress of making films and the strain it was putting on his marriage, he decided to wrap up the story in one trilogy. The easiest way to tie loose ends of Yoda's quote saying, no, there is another Skywalker, and also the Han, Luke, and Leia love triangle, was to reveal Leia as Luke's sister. Revealing that Luke and Leia are siblings does make people wonder why they were kissing so much all the time. It's a little weird if George intended that from the beginning. But we forgive it because we understand the realities and the logistics and stress of filmmaking. Even the greatest plans change when you're in production.
Yeah.
One of the greatest offenses that fans cite for canon is the Holdo maneuver. For those unfamiliar, Admiral Holdo takes a ship, turns on the hyperdrive, and flies through a capital ship, annihilating a bunch of the fleet and the capital ship itself. If using a hyperdrive to ram a capital ship is a viable tactic, why wouldn't the rebellion use this against the Death Star? Why would any army build expensive, large, less maneuverable targets? These are all very fair questions. The Holdo maneuver creates more cannon questions than it answers.
Yeah.
But let's examine the Holdo maneuver in the context of the story. Admiral Holdo admonishes Poe for doing a risky, heroic act that won a skirmish. She intentionally withholds intel and plans from him for no reason other than resentment. And she complains about men. Pardon the language, Your Honor, but in legal jargon, she is what we refer to as a bitch feminist. She's conceited, rude, and condescending. And I can't think of a better way of illustrating a level of character depth than watching her make the ultimate sacrifice to save the rebels while taking an extraordinarily risky maneuver, one like she criticized Poe for doing earlier in the film. At her heart, she also wanted to be a hero. When I first watched the Holdo maneuver in theaters, I thought it was insanely cool and dead serious. One of the coolest things I'd ever seen in Star Wars. After watching some reviews and reactions to the film, I understand why this creates problems for all of the previous work, and lessening the cool factor substantially, I would say. But such a dramatic event emphasizing a revelation to the audience that she too is a reckless hero deep down was immediately effective. Conclusion. George Lucas set the precedent for ruining canon.
He's really thought things out.
George Lucas already demonstrated multiple times that he wasn't keeping close track of his own canon. He set the precedent for canon abuse and disregard for fandom. He had to make changes mid-trilogy to accommodate the pressures of making these films. He altered the hollowed original trilogy effectively, permanently. I don't know why I typed that, so sorry. And still to this day hasn't listened to fans about releasing the original cut. I'm certainly not saying Disney handled the Star Wars IP well, but George didn't either. For me and for a lot of fans, Star Wars died with the prequels. I remember when it was announced that Star Wars was buying Disney, the vast majority of fans were extremely excited. We'd seen how they developed the MCU to this point, and we're hoping Disney would resurrect Star Wars to its former glory of the original trilogy. And most of us walked away from Force Awakens feeling like Star Wars was back. Notice the phrase, Star Wars is back. We wouldn't have had this excitement for Disney taking the reins in 2012 if George hadn't killed Star Wars first. An entire documentary was created, which Your Honor featured in, called The People vs. George Lucas. It details how fans were offended by George's handling of this IP, including the canon. Disney may have failed to resurrect Star Wars, but they aren't responsible for killing it. George Lucas is. I yield the floor.
Your Honor, I would like to object to my esteemed colleague's entire testimony,
and also Tim
his entire argument. George Lucas is not on trial here. Disney is on trial. He failed to address the actual case at hand, and I would have all of what he just said stricken from the record.
Your Honor, if I may make my case, I think it's hard to say that Disney killed anything if George Lucas already killed it.
But that's not what we're discussing here today. That's not what's on trial.
That's what the entire trial is over, is the death of Star Wars.
But that's not what we're arguing today.
But I would like to say that Become the Night looks like Paul Rudd, so that means all of his testimony is admissible. That's what I have to say.
I think there's more than enough evidence in there to show that George, the guy who made the canon, also didn't pay that close attention, and that I think fans need to understand what level of
I'll keep all of them in my prayers.
Not grievance, leniency they're willing to give and why. And I'm certainly not going to make an argument saying that Disney didn't abuse canon. I mean, I would argue that's almost indefensible. But I would have to say, if we're going to put blame on someone for ruining Star Wars, I think George did it first.
I'm happy to rebut
Judge
every
Gore,
one of my
Judge
esteemed
Gore,
colleagues.
Judge Gore, you're muted. Judge Gore.
I'll just say, excuse me, Mr. Burnett, please, we will be getting to the debate phase in a short period of time. I would like the defense to complete the presentation. We have Mr. Matt up
That's
next.
fine with me. I just wanted to make my objections on the record.
I appreciate that, Mr. Burnett. We will move to an open debate phase very, very shortly. We have Mr. Matt is up next, and we have two witnesses who will be testifying as well. Mr. Matt, I will put you front and center. You have the floor, and you may begin your presentation. You have less than 15 minutes, so please, you'll need to move this along. Move along.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call my first witness, Disney expert and YouTube host, WDW Pro.
WDW Pro, will you abide by the court? Would you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you, George.
I do.
Okay, you're sworn in.
George.
Mr.
You may
Pro,
proceed, Mr. Matt.
Yeah. Well,
You may
it is
proceed,
a
Mr. Matt.
court.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate it. Mr. Pro, can you please tell us briefly who you are, what you do, and where your work can be found?
My work can be found on the YouTube channel, WDW Pro, as well as on the website, www.thatparkplace.com, where I operate as an analyst of all things Disney and all things that should be fun. Happy to be here. Looking forward to this questioning.
Mr. Pro submitted written testimony answering the question, in your expert opinion, do you think there was any better organization other than the Walt Disney Company to take the Star Wars brand into the future? Mr. Pro, could you please read the court your statement?
Well, I could. I suppose I'll have to pull that up. Do you want to go to another question while I pull that up?
I will highlight a part of your statement. In your statement, you said Disney would seem to be a perfect fit for Star Wars, both in the present, past, and future.
Really?
It sounds like in your written statement, you don't. Do you have it up? Do you want to read it?
I wonder if
I don't yet, but given our time constraints, perhaps it would be more.
I can just read it real quick.
Yes. Let's speed through this.
Let's just do that. Mr. Pro submitted to the court his written statement. The Walt Disney Company is uniquely positioned to promote and facilitate the growth of the Star Wars franchise, leveraging a host of media delivery platforms as well as the best box office pipeline in the industry. The company's only real weaknesses is in terms of, one, inability to produce video game content in-house, and two, potential and perceived inability of Lucasfilm to produce satisfying Star Wars content on a regular basis. In every other way, Disney would seem to be a perfect fit for Star Wars, both in the present, past, and future. Although the intellectual property is damaged, there is little doubt the stories of George Lucas could make tens of billions of dollars over the next decades. Also of note, Disney's relationship with third parties such as Hasbro and Electronic Arts should prove invaluable to continuing not only a passive media large growth future for Star Wars, but also tremendous increases in merchandise and interactive media segments. So it sounds like you don't agree with the plaintiff, Mr. Pro, that the franchise is somehow dead or murdered.
Dead, no. Murdered, no. Damaged, yes.
You honestly believe, in your expert opinion, given the current conditions, that Disney, and only Disney, has the best ability to produce Star Wars into the future?
At this time, yes. That could change in the next years, but as of the present, right now, where we all sit, that remains true.
Last week, we heard the prosecution highlight moments of Disney CEO's Bob Iger's book, The Ride of a Lifetime, during his contract negotiations between George Lucas. Given the history of the Walt Disney Company and their relationship with outside auteur creators like George Lucas, did you expect Lucas to get everything he wanted in the Star Wars deal, retaining some aspect of brand control? If not, please explain.
I never anticipate that anyone will receive the full benefit of everything they would wish to have in contractual negotiations. When someone does receive everything they're asking for in contractual negotiations, the other side has clearly screwed up.
Did you think Bob Iger acted somehow maliciously when representing the Walt Disney Company in their effort to purchase Star Wars?
No, not at that time.
Your Honor, I have no more further questions for Mr. Pro. Thank you, Mr. Pro. I have no further questions at this time.
I understand you have another witness. Is that true?
That is correct, Your Honor. I'd like to call former network executive Paul Chato to the stand. Thank you.
Mr. Chato, do you promise and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you, George?
George, I do swear. Yes, I do.
You may proceed,
Mr. Chato, can you,
Matt.
I know of him.
Can you please briefly tell us who you are, what you do, and where we can find your work?
I am a former network executive up here in Canada for the CBC. I was head of TV comedy, and I spent 3 years in Los Angeles researching comedy and how you Americans do it so well. And I met many expatriate Canadians who were famous in Hollywood and learned all the ins and outs of what the studio systems were down there. I was even offered a job at Paramount as a VP of development, but I decided to do other things. So that's my short history.
Well, we're glad that you're here. You're the perfect witness for this case. Thank you for being here. Set in the fictional realm, the Star Wars franchise is almost 50 years old. The plaintiffs contend that legacy characters are somehow sacrosanct, and even over decades, the primary cast of heroes must remain static, with stories centering on the same handful of actors. Mr. Chato, I'd like to show you a few exhibits using some other major American franchises as a demonstration of how that sentiment doesn't match reality, and get your reaction to these next items. We'd like to see Exhibit B, please. Is that possible?
You will need to share screen yourself, Mr. Matt. So you bring it up on your browser in another tab, and there is an option at the very bottom. It says present. You'll be able to present whatever it is you're about to show us.
And Your Honor, I'd just like to point out I do have 100,000 subscribers, so I just want to point that out.
Yes,
objection, relevance. Hearsay.
It means I'm a big mucker. That's what it means.
No, it's not hearsay. He has the evidence behind him over his shoulder. You can see the 100,000 subscriber plaque.
Oh, he does have that silver.
It means I'm a major mucker in the business.
I'd like to remind the court that Mr. Chato is Canadian, and that his 100,000 subscribers only translates to 83,000 subscribers.
Ooh.
Mr. Ng. Mr. Ng.
Because he's Canadian.
We're looking only for funny jokes in courts.
I apologize, Your Honor.
Mr. Matt, have you found a way to present your screen?
Your Honor, my connection as we live stream, I can't pull up my Google Documents with the exhibits. The producer has them. Maybe he could share his screen. This is
Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, are you able to assist with Mr. Matt? If you put the link to the documents into the private chat, Mr. Brown,
Exhibit B,
working tirelessly. Just in the private chat, Mr. Matt, you put the link to the documents. Mr. Brown will share screen. We'll go from there, and then you can just scroll down that document. Mr. Brown working tirelessly on the court from behind the scenes. And there you go. Did you put in the private chat the link to the
bandwidth is being?
All right, you'll have to wrap up your. You'll have to wrap up in 5 minutes your presentation, but perhaps you can describe for us some of this. And what we'll do is we will put your link to the Google Docs with your evidence of all your presentations, including Come the Night. We'll put the links to those presentations in the description of this episode, along with, if you're interested, we have all of the counts and charges. So in this episode, it's not there now, folks, members of the jury, but it will be in the description for this episode. All of the links to the Google Docs with the defense and the prosecution and the charges themselves. You will be able to examine them.
Video description.
So thank you, Mr. Knight.
The link to this video is in my description. So you can go look.
I
proceed,
can't get
Mr.
to
Matt.
my Google documents. This is the stream.
Documents and presentations.
All right, I got it. So if you look at this, X-Men comic book, you see that.
Done streaming
This came out in 1963. It has all the original legacy characters of the X-Men: Beast, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Iceman. And then on this X-Men, 20 years later, franchises we were talking about, totally different team. And my question to Mr. Chato is you see that Stan Lee knew that the characters in Marvel had to evolve. What do you think that evolution in the Uncanny X-Men tells us about legacy characters?
Well, I think it's important to mention that no one purposely makes bad product. And in the case of the comic books, they knew to continue the interest in the comic books is that they had to add new characters. You couldn't just maintain legacy characters.
And to a certain extent, that's correct.
Your Honor, not being able to show my exhibits really just blows my presentation, actually. So my bandwidth is to the limit. I can't get to my Google Doc.
Could you send them to me and I can share my screen? Would that be okay?
If I could get to my Google Doc,
Mr. Matt, put the link to the Google Docs in the private chat, so we can all get.
I cannot bring up my.
Very simple.
I cannot bring up Google.
Just cut and paste.
I'm sorry.
It's
not
fine,
letting me do it.
I think Become the Knight added the link.
No, that's
he does?
That's Mr. Knight's presentation.
Oh.
Yeah, that's for the description of the show after we're done.
Oh.
It's my system is not acting up. It's acting up. I can't really access it. I'm having too much technical difficulty. I'm so sorry.
Well, you're gonna have
back
to
after the break and maybe try to.
You're going to have to proceed with your argument. Let your oral argument here, and if you could just continue.
All right. Let's cut to the end here. I can't use exhibits. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we heard that somehow Lucasfilm president and Star Wars brand manager Kathleen declared the Force as female.
Kennedy.
Mr. Chato, did you ever see Miss Kennedy make such a declaration in the media? Ever catch an interview or video clip of this accusation in any form?
No.
When you viewed the Disney sequel trilogy, did you notice anything in the new film specifically about the feminization of the fictional power of the Force?
I did not.
I would like to address the notorious Force's female image portrayed somehow as related to Star Wars. Take a close look at the Force's female t-shirts. It's no word Star Wars, no Star Wars style font. Basically a generic block lettering in all caps. The photograph that you know as Kennedy wearing the Force's female t-shirt was taken at the annual Archer Film Festival supporting female high school filmmakers in Beverly Hills, California in May 2017. The event had nothing to do with Star Wars. It had nothing to do with the Walt Disney Company, but it has a connection to the corporation Nike. In the spring of 2017, Nike launched a marketing campaign aimed at young women called The Force is Female to support their popular athletic shoe known as Air Force One. Miss Kennedy was unable to appear today. One of my exhibits was a video where an interviewer asked Miss Kennedy, "Did you know that you created such a controversy wearing the Force's female t-shirts?" She said, "When I showed up at my daughter's school, everyone was already wearing the Force's female t-shirts because the corporation Nike handed them out." That's what she said. Then the interviewer in my last exhibit, I had one more exhibit to show you where Kennedy on video explains her philosophy about the Force. In this video, she's asked, "Do you think the Force is female?" She says, "No, I don't think the Force is for women. I don't think the Force is for men. The Force is the ubiquitous power."
Mr. Blackwood show.
And therefore, I wasn't even aware that I made the controversy that I did when we wore the Nike t-shirts, The Force is Female. Unfortunately, I had clips to play you. I can't show you that. So, Mr. Chato, I have you here. I'm very sorry that we had some problems. Now that you're aware of these facts, that the Force's female T-shirt is for a Nike shoe, that Kennedy was asked directly on camera, do you think that the Force is female? And she said, no, it's really for everybody.
What about white
Mr. Chato,
yeah.
what do you think now of the plaintiffs using this photo out of context to mislead the public, essentially?
I think it has been used incorrectly to tar and feather a very talented Hollywood executive with a fantastic track record.
I really wonder if those T-shirts that Potato Candy was actually wearing,
with the new evidence presented,
is a
with your expertise as a former network executive,
I need to look that up.
I think it's safe to say now that Kathleen Kennedy did not declare the Force's female and has been herself a victim of false, misleading claims by a group of angry fans stuck in the past, unwilling to confront reality. Finally, taking all this into account, Mr. Chato, in your expert opinion, do you think Star Wars franchise was somehow murdered, damaged beyond repair?
Absolutely not. The myth of Star Wars is still very strong. As the Knight said, George did his own damaging himself. We all love Jar Jar Binks. There's so many aspects to the first three. Let
me ask you about canon real quick before we go. Mr. Burnett mentioned how sacrosanct canon is. We all enjoy Mr. Burnett's commentary about Star Wars and other things, but let me ask you about canon. When it comes to canon, isn't it a case of aggrieved fandom wanting to have their cake and eat it too? Which George Lucas canon is acceptable? Which George Lucas canon is mocked and rejected by the Star Wars cool kids? Ewoks, Jar Jar Binks, the holiday special? Mr. Chato, is all canon truly on the same playing field, deserving to populate comic books, video games, and cinematic feature films equally?
Well, I think it's true that George Lucas made up canon on the fly as he needed it. And to expect that Disney isn't going to be doing the same thing, I think is a fallacy. I personally know about the holiday special because the director of our comedy show, The Frantics, Four on the Floor, was selected by George Lucas himself to direct the holiday special. And that turned into a complete fiasco because of George's involvement.
About the Star Wars Christmas special.
So George was inconsistent in his shepherding and nurturing of his own brand. He wasn't a superhero. So there was productions that became...
George did not have magical capabilities, to the best of my knowledge.
He's an imperfect human being like us all, and he's fallible. And we've seen that not all canon is created equally. Is that true, Mr. Chato?
Correct. And it looks like he dresses from the Salvation Army.
Yeah, I don't know about the last guy. I would agree that, he's not a perfect
I could
person.
Continue. I have one more thing. In The Force Awakens, Disney Star Wars Episode 7, it rests at number 11 for all-time total gross at the box office, adjusted for 2022 ticket prices. It beat 5 out of 6 George Lucas-produced feature films, including fan favorite Empire Strikes Back. Episode 8, The Last Jedi, charts at 44, in between Home Alone and animated Disney classic Pinocchio. But legacy character actor Carrie Fisher had suddenly died before the film was finished. Mr. Chato, this tragedy had to impact the quality of story regarding the arc of legacy characters and might have contributed to a sense of disappointment, removing an essential link like Princess Leia Organa mid-production of a trilogy of new films without warning. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would. As an executive, this would have been a crushing blow to be able to maintain the momentum of the franchise. Carrie Fisher was a very important component of the Star Wars franchise, and to see her go that way was not Disney's fault, unless they arranged to kill her. I can't talk about it.
And then as soon as she died, their plans had to have radically changed, and they were not allowed to finish with the story that they intended. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. The movie went through radical changes just to accommodate the fact that Carrie was no longer available, which is not Disney's fault.
Your Honor, I have one more point. I'd like to go over Harrison Ford real quick. Harrison Ford was seen on Jimmy Kimmel 8 years ago, gleefully declaring that behind the scenes he lobbied to kill Han Solo and had been doing so for 30 years. If fans are upset that Han Solo was killed in The Force Awakens, maybe they should direct their anger at the influential actor who wanted his legacy character dead for decades.
Let me just say this. I'm not necessarily upset that Han died, because there could be an argument for the fact that it could move the story forward, and that's fine. But I don't like necessarily the way he died. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It felt like it was a throwaway. Not to mention, regardless of how the actor feels, the actor is just there to do his job, which is to do his part in the story, to act it out. And yeah, I've seen over the years Harrison Ford doesn't, of all the characters that he's portrayed, the only one he really seems to like portraying is Indiana Jones. So it's no surprise that he didn't care if Han lived or not, because whenever somebody would bring up Star Wars to him, he just didn't really like talking about it. I don't think he cared. He had apathy toward it for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, because to be honest with you, that is the role that kind of made his name up on the map in Hollywood. Made him an actual A-list star. But nevertheless, I didn't like the way they killed off Han, but I didn't have a problem with them necessarily killing off Han if the death of a legacy character like Han Solo had some purpose or meaning to it more than what they did in the movie. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me in the movie. Anyway, let's continue on.
Let's be honest, Mr. Chato. Crotchety Harrison Ford did not look forward to the new gig, but he took the money anyway. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
It should be noted for the record that in my exhibit, Mr. Ford is gleefully taking credit for the demise of Han Solo on a late night talk show in front of a national audience. Your Honor,
Mr. Matt, if you could bring it home and complete your presentation.
I would like to say that if you look through the evidence that I presented, that I will put up in a link, the Force's female is a Nike Corporation spring of 2017 advertising campaign. We have been lied to for 4 straight years about how this has anything to do with Star Wars or the Walt Disney Company or Kathleen Kennedy. The Force's female is a Nike ad campaign. So I would submit to you that in that video, she's asked, what is Kathleen's philosophy of the Force?
You know what? I'm going to look that up right now. I'm kind of curious about that. The Force is female Nike ad. Their campaign dropped with a new line of Nike's popular Air Force Ones. So it is about the shoes, but it's awful coincidental that they would pick Potato Kennedy, Kathleen Kennedy, to represent this. I don't know. It just does not. I mean, it feels intentional. Not only to try to push their shoe line, but maybe also to push a narrative. Because it says right here that it was an intention to support women's rights. Okay, so let's continue on.
The Force is not female, according to Kathleen Kennedy. I rest my case. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Matt, for moving forth in spite of some technical difficulties. I'll say this when it comes to the preparation of documents. And look, while we take the proceedings in court seriously, this is the first time something of this nature's ever been done. So we are going to have some technical issues. I want to compliment Mr. Knight on the preparation of his documents. Mr. Ozark, I did find the documents you sent me. They weren't really appropriate to display on screen. There were a list of links. I think to prepare that in the future, what you should do is share it so that it's shareable, not editable, shareable. So anyone with the link can view it, but not everyone with the link can edit it. Okay. Yeah. Second thing is, if you have a link to a video, just embed the video. If you have photos, embed the photos. That way, as we're scrolling through the document, we'll be able to see the photos and see the picture. So what you prepared was a very good list of evidence, but it's not presented in a way that we could have shown it on screen. So I want to compliment you on your research, and I would like to share it. It'll be shared in the link to the description in this episode. I promise we're going to put up all the links. And Mr. Knight kind of set the standard. Mr. Matt, we'll have you back on a future session in court.
Thank you.
I want to I want to thank everyone here for taking all of this very seriously. I want to thank you, members of the jury. We have 1,069
like he's a lawyer, possibly.
people watching us live. Mr. Ng, how many people
69,
are watching?
Your Honor.
Nice.
69.
Oh, now it's 1,070. Somebody just joined. I'd like to check in with Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood has been tirelessly drawing on screen. I see. I believe that's Mr. Chato, among others.
I thought that was Joe Biden.
Don't say that.
Perhaps there's some.
Oh,
there you go. There's Mr. Knight. Perhaps there are other some Star Wars inspired photos, drawings in there as well. Again, follow Mr. Blackwood at Blackwood. We have his information. It's in the description of this episode.
I think that's me.
Well, there you go. We will have a brief recess of a couple of minutes if you'd like to use the facilities. And if you would like to grab a delicious beverage, please take the time to do so. Jury, please do not leave. You are going to see some videos that may relate to things that we've been discussing here today. So please stick around for the second half. Open debate is coming. And I will, when we come back from that, I will be reading your super chats to kick things off. And we'll be throwing other questions on screen. So get ready for the second half of Critics Court, Star Wars on Trial. Here we go, folks.
If I feel like Star Wars is very like hate.
We're going to take a few minute break with this as well. I'm going to go run to the little penguin's room. The iced coffee is going through me today. So I'll just let this kind of play, and then I'll be back shortly.
Patriarchal and clothes make the man toxic. Yes. Just because you're a stormtrooper in the Empire doesn't mean you can't look fabulous. The first order of business must be uniform. And uniform doesn't mean it all needs to look the same. Accessorize. Long live the matriarchy.
Follow these Disney Star Wars story commandments. Thou shalt ignore logic and canon for whimsy and convenience.
Star Wars fun meals for your kids. A hamburger, french fries, and Coca-Cola. Imagine how much fun your kids will have.
I did research to try to distill everything down into motifs that would be universal. I attribute most of the success to the psychological underpinnings, which have been around for thousands of years, and people still react the same way to the stories as they always have.
So what lessons do you think they're taking away from watching Star Wars in Italy and Malaysia and South America?
The average human being has much more awareness of the other cultures that coexist with them on this planet, and that certain things go across cultures, and entertainment is one of them, and film and the stories that I tell cut across all cultures, are seen all around the world.
Court is now back in session. We've returned from our recess. So we will continue with our now open debate. Before we do that, I'll be reading some super chat questions and comments that have come in. And I also want to let people know that there will be a poll now during this where you can vote whether you think the defense or the prosecution is doing a better job. That poll will be up there momentarily. Thank you, Ms. P. Coffee, for adding the poll, and thank you to the mods out there, Lord Thoth.
Will there be rebuttal to the defense's presentation?
100%, Mr. Burnett. You will be able to rebut. I want to get through these super chats quickly, and we're moving to open debate and rebuttal of arguments. Here we go.
I'm back.
Bushin Ryu Cat for 5. Your Honor, if the prosecution wins, will you consider part of the fine to release the Phantom Menace 3D edition for home so I can trash TFA 3D copy? That is not up to me, but thank you for your support of the channel. Nerdgenics for $4.99. Canon violations. Number 1, Sidious's unexplained return. Number 2, retconning Anakin's redemption and identity as the chosen one. Number 3, Rey Skywalker, in quotes. Number 4, Force Heal. Max Maketh for $4.99. In the Legends book Kenobi, it is explained that Kenobi is a very common surname. I did not know that.
I did not know that
As a serious man for 5, as in the court of the Queen of Hearts, we really should have begun with sentencing. Well, there you are. Nice reference.
All right, let's pass through some of these super chats because I don't really.
Order.
I want to go
That
back
will
to
happen now.
actual
Seriously, we are making court trial.
Viewer. I assume it's a but it's a longtime viewer of the Film Threat live stream. And
Thank you for 2 subscribers. It says Mike.
Looks like maybe
concede certain other things, which I will get to in my rebuttal.
Thank you.
There we go.
Moved on to open debate.
Okay, we're in open debate now.
This is now open. I will come in to referee this at times if it gets a little heated, but you may begin.
It does sometimes.
And Mr. Burnett, you were chomping at the bit to get started. Why don't you kick things off?
Just a few things that I wrote down regarding the force pull that is shown in the beginning of The Empire Strikes Back, and why wasn't something like that used in Star Wars on the Death Star? Well, Luke had been using the Force for mere days in Star Wars. He wasn't even aware
that was Obi-Wan on the Millennium Falcon. Obi-Wan has been seen to leap in crazy lava pits and swing his lightsaber super quick. You know, he's done incredibly awesome stuff. He was there on the Millennium Falcon.
Well, we don't know where. We don't know if he was in striking distance. Maybe they kept him back so he wouldn't be discovered. He was the most important person on the ship.
Do you think it's a smart idea to have a Jedi Knight be the one being protected during combat
Well, this wasn't the issue. This wasn't what you brought up. You brought up Luke
Vader's
Skywalker
detective.
specifically in the Force pull, and you used the Force pull of the lightsaber in the Wampa Cave as your example. You didn't bring up Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm addressing what you said about the Force pull and Luke. And the thing is, Luke didn't know how to do a Force pull, and by Empire Strikes Back, he did.
I'm not saying
all
that
I'm saying.
Luke didn't know how to do a Force pull. I'm saying that Force pull wasn't a part of canon, and George made it up because it was cool for the Empire Strikes Back, which is great. It's fabulous.
I don't think he made it up at all. I think we hadn't seen any, hardly any of the Jedi's powers or any of the Force powers at all until we get to really Empire Strikes Back. That's it. I mean,
Mr. Burnett, let me ask you a question. Did George Lucas have the right to tweak, alter, disregard, and contradict his own source material? Particularly this point, I bring it up at this point because not a whole lot had been established about the Force. I don't know what kind of canon was established in A New Hope.
I imagine it was intentionally vague in order to probe people's imaginations. He wanted to keep it vague.
Well, I mean, it takes place in a few days. I mean, that's like asking a chemist everything he knows about chemistry and demonstrating it in a few days, a few minutes of time. I mean, the Force, I mean, how long does it take a samurai to learn how to wield a sword in all the different ways that he can wield a sword?
Right.
I mean, we never sat down and no one went to Jedi school in these movies. You know, we saw the Jedi Academy or younglings being trained, but no one ever took us through the years it would take to become a Jedi, from the time you were a small child to the time you were until you could become a Padawan. Took years. So the idea that we're supposed to have seen every moment or everything that a Jedi could do in the space of a movie is absurd.
Yeah, and see, that's why in the prequels, George established the thing when we see that, you know, Anakin, when they eventually brought him to the Jedi Council to be approved to be trained, they denied it because he said he was too old. Because they started him way young, because it's a lifetime discipline to study the Force, to learn about it, to learn how to commune with it, to learn how to control it. It's not something that happens like he's talking about in episode 4 of New Hope that you learn in a few days. It just doesn't happen that way. You know, Tracy says he never met my college professors. All following exams were pretty much write everything you know about chemistry in 3 hours or less. Yeah, well, there wasn't the really. I had college professors like that too. I had a physics professor who was like that. That everything you're supposed to have learned all the way up to that point, he wanted it in the exam. Every exam was that way. Oh, I know you're not kidding. I know. But obviously that's different here than like the Force. I mean, because it was already kind of established in Empire with Yoda and Luke's interaction that Yoda was kind of like letting Luke know just how long it takes, that it's not a instant knowledge of the Force. It takes a lifetime of discipline and study and controlling your emotions, because they lead to the dark side. Anyway, so let's continue on listening to the debate. I'm enjoying this part.
I guess the point is. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mr.
Yeah, to my point is, you know, the Star Wars canon was always a work in progress from day one.
Yeah.
And that it had not completely been established. I mean, I think the majority of it had been laid down and established by the time Revenge of the Sith came out. So to say that, George violated his own canon with the Force pull in Empire Strikes Back just shows that, you know, George didn't even know that there was going to be six movies. He just made Star Wars. You know, he had an idea, had a foundation.
Parent says, as a writer yourself, that you can tell to reveal everything all at once because it is too much for the reader to process in such a short time span, and B, gets the reader bored and not interested in a sequel. Yeah, plus not to mention, most people don't realize this, but when George went to go create Star Wars, Episode 4, the original, it actually wasn't called A New Hope when it first came out. It was just Star Wars. But he already had episodes, I think 1 through 6, already kind of rough outlined of what direction he was going to go. And he chose to start with episode 4 in the middle of the story because it was the most, he felt, self-contained in one single story that wasn't necessary to have an understanding of what's already going on. They kind of explain things. And not to mention, because if you ever watch any of the other movies, especially the prequels or even 5 and 6, if you don't know about what happened in the previous movies, some things could be a little lost on you. And it's because, he says he's he's showing up in my chat. I don't know why you're not seeing Perrin's chat. Tracy, are you on a mobile device? Because if you're on mobile, sometimes it acts differently than it does on an actual computer. No problem. I mean, his showing up, I don't understand. Maybe try refreshing your screen. Refreshing your browser. It's the only thing I can tell you. Parents said he had then dreamed up a noble prospect to make cause of all the work took to sell the first one. Yeah, you guys switch to live chat. Exactly. I do know that kind of like what he was saying there. Yeah, he wasn't sure if Star Wars was going to be a hit or not. He was just making the first film, and he thought this could actually flop or could actually do good. Yeah, it's. I have no control over what YouTube does, so it's more likely if something happens, it's probably on YouTube's side of things anymore. I know that I have no control over whether or not the chat shows up or not. You should be able to see the chat on my screen because I did. I have that right below me. I know it's very small print, but I wanted to make the screen where we watch the video as large as I could, so that I didn't leave a lot of space to put the chat. That's why I was also asking if you're on mobile, because if you're on mobile, you probably can't even read that chat that I put on the screen. Yeah, when making a film, there's always budget constraints and so forth. The thing with like I said, with Star Wars itself, he wasn't sure if the first movie was even going to be a hit or not even going to make a sequel. So that's why he kind of chose the story he did to start off with. That's why we're kind of in the middle of his overall arcing story here. Because like he even had, in the middle of the prequels, he had an idea what he wanted to do in episodes 7, 8, and 9. It just later on, he decided he didn't want to make them. But if you remember, he also gave Disney his outlines for what he thought the continuing story of 7, 8, and 9 were. And basically, he had to choose in the middle of all that story what movie would be the best self-contained, what would be a one-off if by some chance it didn't get an opportunity to make a sequel, what would do the best in the theaters. And obviously we know he made a sequel. I mean, that's why we're even here still talking about things, because Star Wars went on to be, a phenomenon, world-renowned. But nevertheless, that started the foundation, and it kind of, like you said earlier, he couldn't necessarily tell all of it in one story. And just look how deep the mythos is of Star Wars right now. There is a lot to this universe. A lot of it set forth by George Lucas himself. And it's just massive in the intricacies of everything. He had to start somewhere. Anyway, let's continue on watching.
But in Empire Strikes Back, that was his green light to say, okay, I can now legitimately expand on this universe. And so, of course, there's going to be contradictions. Of course, there's going to be tweaking that has to be done. Of course,
I think a huge part. I think a huge part of the fact that we have so many contradictions is the fact that Darth Vader says in the first movie the ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force. It is definitively superpowers that you can willfully tap into at any time, as long as you know how to be spiritual, mystical man.
But my point,
later.
Right. My point is, who is the sole guardian of canon from episodes, episodes 1 through 6? I'm going to say that's George Lucas, and I think the main point here is that this is George Lucas's story.
Yeah.
You know, and for people to, kind of question him, he made mistakes. He contradicted himself.
He's
but
human.
Over time, he was solidifying ultimately what his vision for the Force and for what the Star Wars universe would be. And I think our point here is that Disney had now come in and dismantled everything George had built to that point.
Well, I'd also like to point out that The Empire Strikes Back was written by Lawrence Kasdan mostly, and also Lee Brackett, based on a story by George Lucas.
Right.
So
that's fair.
Even from The Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas allowed other people to write films. Even the prequel trilogy had other writers that he wrote with. So, I would say that in terms of canon violation, here's the thing. I mean, I'll give you an example from another franchise. In Star Trek, for instance, in the first season of Star Trek, we don't really know that there's a United Federation of Planets. You know that there's the United Earth Space Probe Agency. We learn about the Federation later. And I would say, well, that's because there was really no reason or no instance in the stories that were being told in the first season of Star Trek to maybe mention the Federation. It would be like everybody knows the White House is there, everybody knows the U.S. government is there, but they don't mention it every single conversation they have. So the idea that you're supposed to know all canon based on what you see in it, these movies are just a snippet. One of the great things about Star Wars is that there's a whole gigantic universe going about its business, and we're only seeing one small story in the entire Star Wars universe. So the idea that it was ever supposed to encompass everything you needed to know about anything in the Star Wars universe is sort of silly.
I'm not saying that. I'm definitely not saying that. Obviously, storytelling needs to be piecemeal. Obviously, you want to leave some element of surprise to,
every
to
movie you're
the
looking at through
audience
the
to
lens
engage
of
with
the
as they
filmmaker.
go forth on the story
What
as you
he
write it.
wants to tell
I think
of his part
a
of
big
the
problem
story.
here, like I was saying, the canon problems are bound to happen when you have too much power or too much potential power at your disposal. And it falls kind of similarly into the Dragon Ball Z problem. After Goku defeats, I don't know if anyone here on this panel understands this reference or not, but after Goku defeats Frieza, the strongest being in the universe, the saga still continues, and there's always a stronger being in the universe and next strongest being in the universe. It creates a lack of surprise, and it's like, okay, well, how powerful is Goku? How can he possibly have any challenge he's not going to overcome? I think the same thing goes for the Force. Eventually, you're going to run into a problem where if you can just collapse a planet with your fist, your characters are too powerful to the point where they can't have a challenge, and you're going to start having logical problems when you have a Deus Ex Machina. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say. The Force kind of
I have a
acts as
question
Deus
for
Ex Machina.
Mr. Burnett.
True.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Burnett,
could be either way.
I really admire your extensive knowledge about all things Star Wars and Star Trek. I've been a subscriber for your channel for
In my opinion,
probably
when it
3
comes
years.
to
I have to
episodes
ask
1
you,
through 6,
Does that
real
wait, I'm sorry.
final
I
word
thank
on
you for
all
that, but does
is
that mean
George
that you
Lucas
should be
himself,
disqualified from
because it's his vision
participating?
he's casting. So,
well, if we're going to go head to head, I don't think
as Star
so.
Wars fans, we can still speculate.
Well, I
on
think
all
that's
of it.
called sucking up, Robert.
Everyone in the audience should subscribe to Robert Meyer Burnett's YouTube channel if you have not
And it
already.
continues.
If you like long form discussion. Anyway, Mr.
Thank
Burnett, have you ever read
I really
Heir
want
to
one
the
of
Empire?
Shadow. Oh, yes, Timothy Zahn trilogy.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. I'm
Have
reading
you
that right now,
noticed
Heir to the
in
Empire.
Heir to the Empire, which fans will speak at length they get really excited about Heir to the Empire.
It's so
I know
good.
that you might have noticed this. Have you noticed similarities in certain characters in Heir to the Empire that reflect almost derivative characters from the original Marvel comic book run of the 70s? Did you ever notice anything like that?
Absolutely. I think, as a matter of fact, look, I'm still waiting for the Hoojibs to show up in the Star Wars universe because
I have a cassette tape. I have a cassette tape of the Hoojibs. We can play that later.
And Jackson, I'm waiting for Jackson. I mean, you can get a Star Wars black figure now of Jackson. So, no, I think that there was. Look, even the Kyber crystals were originally introduced in Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
That was my next question.
Right.
Yeah. And so, Splinter of the Mind's Eye was something that was going to be made if Star Wars didn't make a lot of money. They could do a sequel on the cheap. That was the origins of that story. George Lucas did write drafts of Empire, but that's why, based on the story if you were in a Writers Guild strike now, they would have gone to arbitration, and Lee Brackett and mostly Lawrence Kasdan would have been, I think, prevailed as the writers of the film. But yes, I think that there was a lot of Star Wars material that people drew from the Han Solo trilogy that Brian Daley wrote, like Han Solo at Star's End, and the Lando Calrissian books, Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean, or Lando Calrissian and the let's say I can't remember any of the other titles, but those books. Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu.
And
that was another one. But yes, I think
you're a perfect person, though, to kind of rebut the rebuttal, if I may. That have you ever heard of the character Dash Rendar?
Yes, Dash Rendar was the star of Shadows of the Empire.
Total bad.
Familiar with the vehicle that Dash Rendar flew?
Yeah, Dash Rendar.
Yes,
I've heard of him.
Yes, it was a Carillion derivation.
Substantially less cool Millennium
Falcon. Does it look like something that we're familiar with in the Star Wars universe?
It has a Millennium Falcon quality to it, I would say.
So you would agree in a sense that there are beloved characters that a hardcore demographic of fans really love.
Trilogy.
But when you take a look back,
I have to look.
They might be slight derivatives. For example, Dash Rendar looks a lot like Han Solo, except he's from a wealthy family.
Probably not read it.
Right.
I've not read all his stuff. Maybe only like.
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. But if you're working in there are certain archetypes in any story, and I would say that in Star Wars, bounty hunters, smugglers, droids, that's part of the universe. I mean, just like truck drivers, military veterans of foreign wars, and people like that, or construction workers, are ubiquitous in our culture.
Thanks for no spoilers.
So I would say that there's probably a lot more smugglers out there in the universe, especially when there's an empire that commerce would have to get done. And what better way than smugglers? I mean, Han Solo. There's more than even one job, but there's more than one HUD out there running criminal empires. So they would need smugglers. Would be, I think, a very great way to make money in the Star Wars universe.
The Star Wars on trial stuff, because they've been bringing up
so
things
that it doesn't surprise me. And souped up Carillion freighters, just like people who like American muscle cars turn to things like Mustangs or Cougars or whatever they wanted to turn into cars. So there's certain shipyards that would make the Kuat shipyards are probably something that would manufacture a lot of these things.
I just want to add that I read the entire Nancy Drew Star Wars series, and I only mention that because I'm jealous of everyone's knowledge.
I am but a humble defense witness, but I would be remiss to not mention that we are seeing this continued pattern, this cycle, in that we have multiple sources now reporting that Heir to the Empire will be returning in name only. That potentially is the next name of Dave Filoni's movie.
Hear me now.
That will be the culmination of the Mandoverse, and so that will be something that returns, yet is retrofitted now to fit Filoni's vision for what that should be, if that is indeed the real title of that movie.
And that won't cause confusion at all.
Not a bit.
There are a couple relevant chat comments that I want to get to really quick. Joey Hamilton for 2 says, "Happy belated 35th birthday, Robert Meyer Burnett."
Thank you. Yes, my birthday was on Monday. 35, though. You flatter me, sir.
Happy birthday, Mr. Burnett. 200 Watt Studio for 2 says Robert Meyer Burnett knows his stuff. But Mr. Rubio has a comment here. Kevin Rubio, some of you may know, is the director of Troops. Has also been involved
Troops was good.
in many Lucasfilm projects. So we appreciate his attendance as part of the jury. Kevin Rubio for 10 says the Force is female. The quote daughter from the wait, let me go back to that. What happened to that? I was in the middle of reading that. What happened?
Did you? I don't know.
Did someone unstar? Can you
He
bring
going
up,
back into more super chats
Mr.
again? 'Cause I kind of want
Rubio's
to pass through
comment
that.
again? I was in the middle of reading it. I wasn't done.
Yeah, it looks like he is.
High Republic is post George Lucas, so your argument fails. Let's try to find that Kevin Rubio comment from earlier.
Yeah, apparently it is.
Relevant. Did someone unstar it on accident while I was in the middle of reading it? And happy birthday, Laser Bob, Cardinal Sin.
Yeah,
for
Rip
Buck
Terry
99.
Fisher,
That
definitely.
Someone that you know, a reference, Mr. Burnett.
When I was a Laserdisc retailer in the 80s at Seattle Silver Platters.
Yeah, they
it was a store chain.
reconstructed
I was the
Luke.
manager. I was the Laserdisc manager and buyer.
So,
They
I mean,
called me
reconstructing
Laser Bob,
Leia.
and I had my name
It's
tag
not
said
impossible,
Laser
but
Bob.
I imagine it's
Well,
very
there you
difficult
are.
to
Laser
do.
discs from a bygone era, and I still own some laser discs.
I like my laser dicks.
Oh, there we go.
That's what she said.
Mr. The dive in the form.
Okay, that's
Rubio
why I
may
don't like
turn
the
up,
comments part.
in this
let's
trial,
skip to
later
the
in this trial,
actual-
we have some shocking
Okay,
guests
they're going
that
back
will
to
be
open debate
appearing
here.
in future editions of Critics Court. And Kevin, I've spoken
it
to
at?
Kevin, and he will be appearing on a few. Let's continue. We're continuing with our open debate, and I'm going to highlight Mr. Blackwood here just for a moment so we can see some of the sketches that he's working on.
Yeah,
But please
Perrin,
continue,
with the Ahsoka
gentlemen.
series, they're not
Yeah, actually,
saying
I'd like to,
that they are doing
ask
the
Mr.
Timothy
Burnett a
Zahn
question,
series.
but,
Remember,
the
Disney
question is,
has
Mr.
decanonized
Knight's,
the EU.
Argument
So all
was that
the Star
George
Wars
Lucas
books
basically
are not
killed
canon
Star
to
Wars,
them.
that he delivered
They
in
pick and choose what they want
2012
out of
to
it.
Disney, a
That's
dead
part of
franchise.
the
Do you
reason
believe that
why
is true?
Star Wars is
Not
on
at all.
trial. It's one of the
I
things
don't
right
think-
here we're
I
actually
think
talking about
that
today.
While
Fraudulent
I am not a
misuse
fan
of canon.
necessarily the execution of his prequel trilogy, I think the story of the prequel trilogy about how democracy dies to be replaced by a jackbooted dictatorship is more relevant than ever. And I think that storyline will continue to be relevant as we move forward into the 2020s. And I think, in like all great science fiction, it was very prescient of the times we're living in now. So, if anything, while because of George Lucas's his removal from the rest of the human race because he couldn't walk out of his house and go to Starbucks without getting mobbed, and maybe the subtle nuances of human behavior were lost upon him when he made the Star Wars prequel trilogy, I think the storyline that's being told, the actual tale of all three films, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and The Revenge of the Sith, are very relevant and maybe the most Star Wars story ever told. It's just that it's the minutia, the nitty gritty, like the characters and dialogue that
or like the
work.
plot of the
Yeah,
entire
the
first
prequels
movie
are
that could have been
the
summed up in
story
an act.
of Anakin Skywalker and how he turns from the
Perhaps.
light to the dark.
I mean, I'm a big fan of the machete order of the Star Wars movies, which eliminates Phantom Menace entirely.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of my questions of Mr. Chato we didn't get to, that there's this thing called the Phantom Edit, that you have hardcore fans who in 1999 were rabid for new Star Wars content. They were primed. They were waiting in line May 1999. Many of them walk out of the theater upset for several reasons. Jar Jar Binks is one. The young Anakin portrayal that we have such long screen
I don't
time.
mind
with the
Jar
young
Jar
boy
Binks, but
who people
not
just
my favorite.
didn't resonate with a lot of the audience or particular people. And so my question was, we have this popular thing called the Phantom Edit that Mr. Chato has seen. You, Mr. Burnett, you'd rather just not see episode 1 at all? Is that your preference?
I Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a preference, but as my esteemed colleague Become the Night pointed out, there's not a whole lot in that film. I mean, look, there's some great joys to be had, such as the duel with Darth Maul on
Fabulous
Naboo.
Oh,
I really do enjoy that. Unfortunately, that we
Duel of
tragically lose
Fates
Qui-Gon
was
Jinn.
awesome.
I really do like R2-D2 going out on the exterior of Queen Amidala's starship and saving the day.
R2,
you know, and I enjoy a lot of that movie. I enjoy Brian Blessed as the leader of the Gundam.
Sorry, I had to do
you
it.
know, there's some joy to be had there. But here's the thing: the one thing that George Lucas always thought he was making his movies for children, and I don't think he expected adults to embrace them. And I think if you've ever watched The Phantom Menace with a child and seen that film through a child's eyes, there is a lot of value in that movie for children. I saw Star Wars when I was 10 years old and took it very seriously.
Playing a very, very
I don't know
young
if I would have had the
Anakin
same response if
Skywalker.
I was 5 or 6.
That episode
Star
1
Wars, the
has
original.
that feel of
But I've seen young
making
kids
Star
watch
Wars
Star
for
Wars: The Phantom
kids,
Menace
not
for the
the
first
adults
time,
so much.
and there is wonder and awe in their eyes. And I think for that reason alone, The Phantom Menace has value.
Oh, I agree, Joseph. Phantom Menace is...
It appears you are muted in
It's
some
the
way.
start of the story.
Ozark Matt.
Yeah. Matt, you're muted. man.
Problem with
Matt,
exactly.
you're,
it
muted.
kind of gives that
Matt,
start of
you
that
can't hear you.
I can
relationship
attempt to
between
decipher
Anakin and
based on the hand
Padme.
movements.
Please,
I mean, you're
genius
not
piece
only
of
seeing,
questioning.
like I said,
anything from our
the first 3
witnesses,
episodes
you know,
are
you're
all
just because you were a witness,
simply,
both of
they're all simply about the actual story of Anakin Skywalker. I mean, it literally is. And to see who he fell in love with, that became Luke and Leia's mother. It also is the story of how he ended up being a Jedi in ways of the Force, and who actually, you know, we also got to see Obi-Wan training him, because that was alluded to in episode 4. That Ben, older Obi-Wan Kenobi, was Luke's father's master, his mentor. So we kind of see that whole story. So, I mean, leaving one of those out, the father figure. Leaving one of those out, I agree 100%. It makes no sense to do that. You kind of have to take all this as a package deal. 1 through 3 explains a lot leading up to 4. Because think about it. If in episode 4, we see Darth Vader, but we don't really know a whole lot about who he is, or how he become who he is, or what he's really about. We just know that eventually in Empire we find out that he's Luke's father. But I mean, that's just still, how did he end up being Darth Vader? And that's exactly what episodes 1 and 3 do. They tell that story. And I would be the type that I would argue with anybody to say that the prequels or anything else about anybody else's story. It's the main character in all 3 of those is the story of Anakin Skywalker. It really is. Anyway, going on.
If you were witnesses for the defense, doesn't mean you're actually on the side of the defense. If Mr. Pro or Mr. Chato would like to speak of their own minds now that they're no longer witnesses for the defense, they may speak freely right now.
In fairness, Matt is now unmuted. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Mr. Matt. Go right ahead.
Nope. Still.
Yeah, apparently you just made my point.
No, you're still muted.
You're
You're
muted.
Let's go to Mr. Chato and Mr. Pro if you'd like to express yourselves freely at this time.
From an executive point of view, I would say that nobody tries to make bad movies.
Correct.
I would say that the Phantom Edit is a good example of...
It appears that technical issues have beset us yet again.
Can't hear me?
No,
I can hear you.
Oh, that's too bad. And the Phantom Edit is perfect proof that George overextended his hand and someone else
Yeah,
came
you
in
gotta
and
have
actually did a much better
fall
job
guy,
of pulling
Joseph,
together
a
what were
patsy
ostensibly very
that-
good pieces.
that could be
He even
manipulated to
hired,
give full power
the
to
the young Luke was a wretched actor that he hired. So, again, my point is that nothing is infallible. Nobody is infallible, as we all know. No one knows anything in Hollywood.
Well, that just goes back to your original argument. Apparently, you can't just give it all at once in one movie. I mean, it's a story.
What Lucas has
it's
done,
the
and I
entire
would
plot
say,
of the trilogy,
Mr.
exactly.
Knight there
of the prequel
is
trilogy.
correct that he had already set the stage for some very bad pieces.
Because the journey to
for
the dark side
Disney's
is not
trilogy.
a momentary
And
instance.
if
It didn't just
Qui-Gon
happen.
Jinn had not
It
died, then Liam
is
Neeson would maybe
a
not have gone on
process.
to do all those crappy
just
films.
like a journey to becoming a hero,
And what I
journey
would
to
say
becoming
is
evil
that,
is also a journey.
Sorry,
I would simply.
Yeah.
See if we can play it again. Go for it.
Let me just ask Paul a question, but then
sure.
I guess my point or my issue here is, is it your impression that maybe Star Wars should have been taken out of the hands of George Lucas long ago, that he had been misguided in the way he had put the prequels out, and that for us to kind of solely place George Lucas as the arbiter of the Star Wars universe for so long, was that wrong for the fans to have done?
I think he kind of pulled it all together in Episode 3, but I would say that is probably a fairly good assessment. We all viewed those 3 movies with a lot of shock because we went, okay, what fell off? What wheels fell off this wagon here? Who was responsible for it? What happened to Star Wars?
Well, it's also hard to tell the whole thing in one
observation,
shot.
Correct me if
well,
I'm wrong.
Perry.
It seems as though George Lucas is
Well, I
a better
agree.
producer than he is writer and director. Does that sound accurate?
Well, he certainly has the universe in his mind.
Okay.
And I think someone else needed to take that universe, copy it down into a script and make it more coherent. But and again, he was given so much power. He owned the franchise, and I think Episode 1 is a grand
I really
example
liked
of
Qui-Gon
hubris.
Jinn. And he was the master that Anakin really
All right,
needed.
so now to give my thoughts on this after the esteemed
I
commentary
think
by Mr.
Obi-Wan
Cheddar
was
himself.
just kind of.
Thank you.
I would simply say that the Walt Disney
I don't
Company
know, when he
was
wound up
primed and
taking
ready to
on
go as a
Anakin
vehicle
as his
for
Padawan, he
distributing
did that
this
obviously because of
franchise
Qui-Gon
when
asked
it
him
was
to.
originally purchased. That's why so many people were so excited that this was
But
occurring.
at the same time, he
It
was
is
too
correct
young.
that many thought
He was
that
not
George Lucas had went so far astray
a
that
full-blown
perhaps the Walt
master.
Disney
Yeah,
Company
not
would
wise
be a
enough.
salvation
He took on a
for the franchise and
responsibility.
bring
I
it
think
back to
that
prominence.
some of that was also
And
dealing with the
that
failing of
goodwill was
Anakin. Plus,
granted
not to
by the
mention,
market
Anakin was
in
a
terms
lot
of The Force
older when he was
Awakens.
taken on
What
as a
happened
Padawan.
afterwards, though, is that Star Wars, Lucasfilm, and the Walt Disney Company have been fully.
That's why the Jedi Council said that he's too old to be trained, because it is a long process to study the Force, to commune with it, to be one with it, to control it, to let it bind you and bind you to the universe, and it's a journey, and that's why they started them real young, training, and Anakin was too old. So I think part of that also is, think about it in our own individual lives outside of Star Wars. The average person, by they reach age 20 or so, have already kind of made up their mind and decided who they're going to be probably for the rest of their life. Kids growing up still are filled with dreams and hopes and optimism and can be kind of molded and shaped. They're still learning, they're growing, they're being educated. They haven't fully formed. And it makes perfect sense to me that a Jedi would start his training when he's way young. So it becomes a part of who he is. So by the time he's like Qui-Gon's age, he's a full-fledged master because he's been doing it his whole life. And actually it kind of goes along with some of the things that George set up with his whole universe being based loosely like on a samurai Western type feel. And I've studied martial arts. I haven't done it in years, but I tell you right now, even just studying martial arts, it takes years, not just a month or a couple of days. It takes years, sometimes decades, to learn everything there is about it, to get good at it, to master it. It's not something that just happens overnight. Well, there was a lot of things, I think, Perrin, that went to that. It's part of the storyline. It also had to be that in episode 4, George kind of already set that up, that Obi-Wan was Vader's master. Yeah, right. Qui-Gon was actually, what I saw with Qui-Gon is, I think he truly cared about Anakin. He cared more than what he to do right by him than whatever the council believed. That's why he took him on secretly as a Padawan, and then also insisted that Obi-Wan take him on when he died. That type of thing. So, I mean, either way, I agree with what you guys are saying. It's all, see, this is the good stuff. This is the stuff that, in my opinion, that needs to still be in good storytelling these days. And not just Star Wars, but any type of thing. The little integral details are awesome in an overall immersive story. It's something that's lacking in most modern IPs today. I think some of that's because the writers are inexperienced, but I also think it's because a lot of these IPs have, instead of doing a good story, have decided to push a political agenda, which does not make a good story. It's not immersive. It's not a story at all, in my opinion. It's an agenda. And you'll see that in some of the things to where they just feel like they're trying to do shock and awe instead of actually telling all these little intro details that we're even talking about right now here in chat. All the little minutia about each little part of like Anakin's life that was detailed in episodes 1 through 3, and how we could see the slowly turning from the light to the things that led him to leading to the dark. That's just something I think is lost in modern day storytelling. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I really agree a lot with what Chris Gore did here about putting Disney Lucasfilm on trial, because I think they've missed the point of storytelling. Regardless of how they've made Star Wars from when George Lucas turned it over or not, I just think they've missed the whole point of being storytellers. They're not storytellers, they're political pushers. Right. Anyway, let's continue on with the open debate. We're almost through all this.
Determined to not take our money. They apparently do not want our money. And I say that in the same way that I would say that if someone were to purchase the Batman franchise, then refuse to give you Batman, then clearly they just don't care about the cash. Lucasfilm could simply give us the original characters in the way that we wish to have them. Or they could choose to revere the things that George Lucas did well, which is what the fans revere. But they are determined not to do so. Instead, we get things that people don't want. Nobody wants the Rey movie, at least very few do. And when it comes to the Mandalorian and these other entities, we all wanted to see Baby Yoda being trained by Luke Skywalker, but nay, we received only a single episode in the Book of Boba Fett, an otherwise terrible and dreary version of the character Boba Fett from the original trilogy. It seems that Disney enjoys killing our favorite heroes in ways that are unbecoming of them. Han is killed as a deadbeat dad, Luke dies of force constipation, and Leia, well, she just fades away. None of them get to see the victory. None of them go into the promised land.
That's a new term.
Disney needs to fix that if they ever wish for this franchise to be great once more. And if they do that, then the company still stands as the best chance to produce content in mass and distribute it all over the world. But I fear that they are not going to do that because I do not see evidence based on their actions in the past and their actions going forward that would indicate that they care about Star Wars. When it was brought up, the High Republic, while I was here today, I was reminded of just how revolting this whole thing is. And to conclude my thoughts on that, to give you some idea of just how poorly received the
I
High
agree,
Republic
Joseph.
is.
They
And
could
by the
actually
way, that's
put
where
it
the
into
Acolyte is going.
the
Thank God Kathleen found the one person who could produce the Acolyte for us, none other than the
to the
personal
expanded
assistant of Harvey
universe and
Weinstein.
kind of
No
say
one else
this is
could do
just
such a
one
thing.
thing that's happening in the multiverse.
To
of
give you
Star
some
Wars
idea of
out
just
there.
how poorly received the whole deal is, Barnes & Noble signed a contract with Lucasfilm. That contract placed the High Republic on their in-cap spaces inside their stores, the most coveted space in the retail section of the bookstore.
Wow,
However,
I
they
didn't know
quickly
that.
found that the High Republic would not sell, and so they found a loophole that allowed them to put Timothy Zahn novels all over the in-cap space and lay the High Republic books on the floor. That is a great metaphor, a great symbolism for what the Walt Disney Company has done.
So that's what happened. I watched another YouTuber talk about this. He went to a Barnes and Noble and one day and was there to get some books and pick up some comic books. I think he was going there for like manga or something. And he saw a stack of all these High Republic books. He even took a picture of it and how they were no longer on the shelves. He didn't show about the Timothy Zahn stuff, but he showed that the stack of the High Republic books were no longer on the shelves. They were just in a pile on the floor. I wonder what happened there. He didn't really elaborate. So it looks like to me what happened was they found that Barnes & Noble found a loophole to be able to take those things down off the shelves and replace them with Timothy Zahn books, which I really recommend. It's good.
Can it be redeemed? Yes. But direction would have to strongly change.
I'd like to point out that WDW Pro has become a hostile witness.
I was gonna say, are you prosecution or defense here, brother?
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I think he's a witness for the defense.
Disney can still do this, but their time is running out.
I agree. It is technically possible. I mean, they can still resurrect this. I think it's very possible.
That is correct.
Well, I think that the real problem with a company like Disney is their agenda is to create material that works over a number of different platforms. So in terms of first and foremost being for children, obviously they want it to be 4-quadrant entertainment. But when you're dealing with a story that's essentially about war and rebellion, it's interesting to think. A lot of people think that Star Wars was this mirth-filled childhood fantasy, when in actuality, billions of people die in the first Star Wars movie. We watch many people get killed, both in the Battle of Yavin and also on the Battle of the Blockade Runner in the beginning. And it's fairly adult-minded when you walk into the cantina on Mos Eisley. Things like racism against droids are brought up. You have two alien sisters who look over like a morsel. Who knows what they were going to do with him? You had Ponda Baba and Dr. Evazan ready to Kenobi cuts off the arm of is it Ponda Baba? Cuts off his arm. And I mean, Star Wars is a violent, terrifying place. Sand people. There are slavers. There's all kinds of things. And Disney, since they have taken over the franchise, have done everything they can to soft pedal the more unsavory elements that wouldn't necessarily. I mean, they are not really interested in telling the kinds of stories that fans are interested in hearing, because they have to soft pedal the more unsavory elements of the Star Wars universe. I
think Disney could reverse the whole thing if Kathleen Kennedy would dress up in the Leia slave bikini.
You've gone too far, sir.
That was a bad
slave
thing.
bikini.
The hot slave bikini. If KK went in she
come
dressed
on,
up in the
Chado.
slave bikini, then we'd know they're on the right track. That's all I'm saying.
Objection. 0 people want to see that. Nobody wants to see that.
I don't know if you've seen the cover of the new Sports Illustrated.
Woo!
Yeah. I'd rather see Alan's photoshopped suction thing again.
Gentlemen, we're getting close to 2 hours in our court session.
Yeah, we're
if
almost
we
done
could
with
move
this.
to any sort of final arguments or debates, specifically
I
sticking
don't.
to the fraudulent
I
misuse
don't,
of canon.
That's
we
a
have
visual
a
that
poll that is
makes my
currently
eyes
running in the
bleed.
chat. When we get to super chats, we will present the results of that poll. Excuse me for misspeaking there. Could be something of a troll, but any final arguments or things you would like to put forth before we end today's session in court? And it's open debate now, so final arguments.
I think we should give Kennedy credit for not bringing the Ewoks back.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
And I have an electric guitar too, so bite me.
Hell yeah.
Well, there you go.
Remember,
Okay.
He was hired by George Lucas before the sale of Lucasfilm.
Correct.
True.
And also,
Yeah.
I think that
It's
Kathleen
a guitar
Kennedy, one of the
session,
reasons I'm a
baby.
staunch defender of her is she had to deal first and foremost with Disney's corporate agenda as to what they expected from their acquisition. And so Kathleen Kennedy was never necessarily in a position where she could defend, and maybe she has tried to, but we don't know. And if you really look at what Kathleen Kennedy tried to do, when she first started out, she is a producer that is used to hiring visionary directors and supporting those directors. But when Lord and Miller took over Solo, she wasn't expecting them to go off book and spend so much time improvising. She wasn't used to that. And it was a painful, hard decision for her to replace Lord and Miller. But she did try and get some really interesting directors to come in. It just didn't work out the way she wanted to, but she did try. And I think a lot of what she was facing was an uphill battle with Disney corporate and what
Let
they
me take a tremendous risk and push back
Really?
on that statement and see what you do with this. Let me get your thoughts. If that is true, if Kathleen is so superb in what she does, then why was she so poor in her judgment as to the success of The Last Jedi and Rian Johnson, and seems to have granted him a trilogy before we had even seen the results of what the market would say about that movie, that then had to be walked back over many, many years? What do you make
Interesting.
of that?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I think Kathleen would say that they made a great film. I think she would say even today they made a great film. Because I think that, unfortunately, here's what I think they made a film that was daring in certain respects, especially in terms of what they did with Luke. Remember, Rian Johnson didn't put Luke on Achto. That was something J.J. Abrams did. So Rian Johnson was saddled with the question, well, why would Luke wind up as a hermit on an island? He didn't create that scenario. He was presented with that scenario. And I think in having to do that, he did the best he could in terms of trying to come up. Now, did I buy it? Not necessarily. But I think at the end of that movie, Luke Skywalker as a Jedi does one of the most baller Jedi things ever, in that he defeats Kylo Ren and the Empire, or at least allows the Resistance to escape, and he's not even there.
Yeah.
And
I did like that.
That was pretty cool.
In terms of using the Force for defense, that's a pretty strong way to go out. I think there's a lot of other problems that The Last Jedi has, but I think that they thought they made a good film. And again, they thought they made a good film from maybe a perspective of filmmaking. As a Star Wars movie, maybe not so much. But there's a lot of times that studio executives are out of touch with necessarily what a fan base wants.
How is it that Mark Hamill was able to identify during the production of it that we have a real problem here, but they were not?
Well, because, Mark Hamill is, but the thing is, here's the thing.
We just switched sides, man.
but actors, I know, right?
Look at Disney can still bring it back. Disney can still bring it back. Pro's going to wiggle it back.
The substance is more important than anything, honestly.
I mean, I would say that Luke Skywalker is the person who knows Luke Skywalker best is in fact Mark Hamill. And I personally, I am not a fan of Disney's trilogy at all. And I think that what they decided, talking about switching sides, what they decided to do was gross misconduct with a story that could have been. Here's the thing. If you go back to the extended universe, there's so much material now that they're picking and choosing, cherry picking what they think is the best stuff. They could have gone back because the people that wrote a lot of those, especially the early novels and even the Dark Empire comic series, there was so much stuff in those comics that were thought more about than J.J. Abrams ever thought about these things.
Yeah,
because
I don't know why they didn't do that.
Tie-in fiction now spend way more time thinking about the universe and the characters than the people writing movies. And it's frustrating. And we're seeing it with Star Trek Strange New Worlds. They are cherry picking from great science fiction novels and Star Trek novels without accreditation of anyone. They're just taking these things when they should be giving story credit to Ursula K. Le Guin or Dorothy Fontana, and they are not.
Just to give you an idea of how bad The Last Jedi was and the damage that it did to the franchise. Although, let me say again, Disney could bring it back. If I were to ask each of you on this panel, in this courtroom at this time, which you would rather watch, The Last Jedi or The Garbage Pail Kids, I grant you that you'd have to give some real thought to it. So there you go.
I've never seen The Garbage Pail Kids, so I don't know.
As a creative person, and I thought watching the Phantom Menace, the J.J. Abrams one, the
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens. I can never remember the titles anymore.
You're good.
Aging. Is that watching that movie, I will guarantee you, J.J. Abrams started with the picture of Lena Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will. And he went, wow, that picture with the red banners and the white stormtroopers and the black background. I'm going, I'm writing a movie around that. That's why I'm resurrecting, the Empire out of convenience, because that is the picture I'm starting with. And then I'm going to flesh out the beginning and I'm going to create an ending for it. But that was so out of place in the movie and so spectacular. I am absolutely certain that was the first thing on his mind, and that's what he built the movie around, because he's a shallow person.
I don't know. JJ does tend to be a visual type guy.
We did a poll in the chat of who do you think is winning this debate in the trial. We just ended the poll mere moments ago.
Visuals and
out of
effects.
660 votes. And I should note that there are 1,100 people watching right now, but only 660 people voted. So
that's still a high sample.
That's a high sample. 74% believe that the prosecution made a better case. I'd say
bias here.
That means that means that 26% think that the defense did a very good job, which I think, there's a lot of bias.
I think both sides did make valid arguments.
The Disney Star Wars sequel film, so 26% is pretty good. We're going to be doing this poll every week just to see how people are doing. Any final how the prosecution defense is doing. So I definitely want to invite some of you back next week. We're going to be rotating in some new people. You're going to have some returning people as well. People have asked for Anna, that Star Wars girl, to return. Robert, I know you're a busy gentleman. Love to have you back at some point, depending on what we're discussing.
Anna was good last week.
We're all invited back on a future episode. Any final thoughts before I move to our final comments via the chat?
The last thought I would impart on people is, hey, don't forget we were pissed off at George for a long time. And we got really excited when Disney took it over, and we got pissed again. And I'm not saying we shouldn't.
Yeah,
be pissed.
Anna was really good last week. She
think about
she was on point.
Where this
she
all
knew
started,
what she was talking
and have
about.
a bigger picture without rose-colored glasses of just how much crap has been thrown into this universe. And remember, it's science fantasy, so chill maybe. It's possible.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna go to chat comments and questions. You're welcome if you have other courtroom business to take care of and another trial, you're welcome to be dismissed.
These are all
some of these
just super
questions
chats.
address
I'm gonna go ahead and
arguments. I don't see any that necessarily are directed at any particular person. I'm just going to go through these quickly. And I want to thank everyone,
the
the
Mr.
defense
Blackwood
and the
stuff, 'cause I like
prosecution
watching his
for
stuff.
taking these proceedings very seriously today.
Very interesting conversation striking about. Join us at 8 o'clock. And we are going to have.
Okay, they're wrapping up, talking about. I'm skipping through. Okay, here we go. Mr. Blackwood.
He's been drawing this entire session of court. Look at that. Look at this. Great. Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. He is
please,
so good.
Mr. Blackwood, post that on your Instagram. You can follow.
I've got a link to Mr. Blackwood's website in the description of this video, as well as I got links to the original video we just watched today from Film Threat to their YouTube channel in this video, as well as a link to the Google court documents that Chris Gore and Alan created for this as well.
Him at it is.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying
Blackwood.
Mr.
Go to
Blackwood.
BlackwoodPDX.com or at Blackwood_PDX. Follow on Instagram.
He's
for
the part
all
I
the
didn't.
sketches
That was kind of a
from
surprise. I didn't
today's
realize I'd like him that
proceedings.
much.
We're gonna just a few more real quick comments here. Madaween became a new
look
member.
at
We'll
that.
see you in the Discord.
That's
and
one of
everyone
those,
here that's been a part of the
hog
show
things
today,
they were on
there's a Discord
at you
invite
with,
if you'd like to come to the Critics
Luke.
Court and just discuss everything that happened today. Great job, Judge Frank Gore, says Jay Tapia for 199. Thank you for that. And
There's
let's
the
chat
judge,
for the day. Disney
Honorable
Star
Chris
Wars
Gore.
last chat for the day. Disney Star Wars Disney is awful. Oh wow, thank you, Jay Tapia 199, and thank you, Mr. Blackwood. That's awesome. Critical drinker on prosecution. That could end up happening. I've reached out to some of your favorite YouTubers.
R2!
Trust me, it's going to get.
All right, we got to stop here for a second. R2. Oh, R2. I am so glad he drew R2. R2, I've been waiting to see if he was going to draw R2 or not. R2 is my all-time favorite Star Wars character. I mean, I like other characters in Star Wars, but to me, he's the kind of, at times, the unsung hero. A little droid that's got courage and comic relief. He's the best. Anyway.
Get interesting over the coming weeks, but that's it for us for today.
Oh, good old
I want
R2.
to thank everyone. Great job, everyone. See you on the other end. It's a great show. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone. See you next week.
Okay, there we go. And let me switch over here to okay. I want to take this moment to have any final thoughts I may have, or any final thoughts that chat may want to bring up or something. You're more than welcome to. And then we'll wrap up next week, same time, 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be doing count number 3. I really kind of like doing this because I only got to catch a couple of these episodes that Chris Gore did on Film Threat when he was actually live a couple months ago. So I missed the vast majority of them, and I really wanted to see them. So I just thought I would actually rewatch them. I got permission from Chris Gore to do this. R2-D2 and is same things like and C-3PO is like Abbott and Costello. Exactly. R2 is the Costello to C-3PO's Abbott. Because C-3PO is the straight man. I kind of like that because they're a comedy duo, but I also liked how just that R2 for a droid, he's kind of fearless, gets into trouble, gets into anything, just, because he doesn't listen to I mean, look, the first time we saw him in episode 4, what's the first thing he does once he's been bought by Uncle Ben and Luke? He runs off. Anyway, and actually, from the very moment that he did that, I just fell in love with him. He's the best. Good old R2. Woo! Anyway, I thought today the prosecution and the defense both had very good points. I do tend to agree with more what Robert Meyer Burnett said about things. There's a few things I didn't agree with on that. I did like the way Become the Knight presented his arguments. They were very, very precise and very well thought out and very logical. They didn't really seem to have a lot of emotion in them, which is kind of good in a way, because this is not an emotional court. This is actually how you make a logical argument. That's what lawyers kind of do. They argue the law. They argue their point logically. They try not to. Now they may actually try to invoke emotions from like the jury and so forth. But when you're making your argument to the judge, you're wanting to make precedents. You're wanting to make your point, and you want to do it in a logical manner and present the facts as you see them, presenting evidence and artifacts and things like that. But nevertheless, I know that some people may think this is silly. This was a Star Wars trial thing. I personally, I'm a Star Wars geek. I like Star Wars. I also don't agree with everything that Disney has done since taking over Star Wars. And I'll admit, there was even things when the prequels came out that there was parts of it I didn't really care for either. I was going, George, what are you doing? But the overall thing about watching this is kind of get, for one, like Joseph said earlier, he knows all this stuff. And I know quite a bit about Star Wars as well. Probably not as much as like him or anybody else. But I'm learning a lot from just watching this stuff too. Like, for example, I didn't realize that, I guess maybe I just never put it together, that the Forces Female is a Nike ad. That why the picture of Potato Kennedy with those ladies are watching the Forces Female t-shirts. Now, do I believe it's just simply a Nike ad? No. I honestly believe it was KK's also way of pushing her little own agenda. I mean, because look, with the sequel trilogy, she has been pushing, Rey Skywalker, that she's like the bestest ever, that could do anything from the get-go. That's and I still haven't finished that video. There's a video I'm going to be making on the differences between the hero's journey and what I call the hero's journey. The hero's journey is considered a circle. That's a journey that any hero in story writing goes on. I've used it in the novel that I'm writing a little bit. And the hero's journey, there's not really much of a journey if the person's already kind of the best at everything. Where's the room for growth? And the parents says, I understand why Lucas sold out after all the backlash on the prequels. I just wish he would have taken it back and fixed it now. I think also it was more or less, by the time Disney bought it, he was getting up in age. And I think he just saw this as a way to cash out for retirement, because have we seen him do much else after this? Not really. Granted, I know he felt disheartened because of the prequel backlash, but I think there was more to it than that as well. I also thought that if you'd seen this in the, I think day one, maybe day one. No, it was actually last week's Count One. If you'd watched that part of the trial, they actually addressed some of this. That George Lucas actually, in Bob Iger's book, he talks about how George Lucas had kind of the idea that he was passing on the baton, that he gave those 7, 8, 9 outlines of his vision for the way Star Wars was going to go to hopefully be adhered to. He thought when he was handing over Star Wars to Disney that Disney was going to do right by him. that they were going to kind of follow that road line and adapt his story. And in Bob Iger's book, we find out later on he didn't. That they changed their mind. They threw it out completely and did their own thing. And I think some of that is because of, in my opinion, because of Potato Kennedy. I don't give her much slack when it comes to this because she is a ideologue. What that means is she has a open and clear shut case of wokeness, and she wants to push her political views on everyone, and she has, I mean, good example of this. I mean, look, I haven't seen Indy 5 yet, but everything I've watched and read about it says it's just more political diatribe, more of the Phoebe Waller-Bridge dragging around an old Harrison Ford throughout the whole movie and criticizing just how old and stupid white man is, and that this guy should just go away, and and that Phoebe Waller is the best. It's just that same diatribe, and in my opinion, I have nothing wrong with a strong female lead if it is part of the story and done correctly. I mean, a perfect example of that, in my opinion, if you've ever watched like any of the Tomb Raider movies, or even the original Star Wars stuff, we saw how powerful Leia was as a character. She was part of the OG Trinity of Han, Luke, and Leia. Of course, they changed her character a little bit in the sequels. But I mean, I have no problem with being the main protagonist be a man or a woman, or actually, us penguins, all humans look alike anyway. So, I can only tell the difference between another penguin and myself. But needless to say, changing and doing character swaps or changing the way things go just to push a political agenda of any kind, be it good or bad, in my opinion, is wrong because it's not a story. There's a platform for that. It's called politics. This is supposed to be a sci-fi fantasy IP. It's supposed to be a way of telling our stories, a part of pulp culture. And granted, there is politics in pop culture. I know that. But it doesn't have to be that way in the actual story itself. The story just needs to be an immersive tale to kind of draw you in, to make you a part of that universe that the storyteller is trying to tell, to get you lost in it. Not preach at you and try to tell you need to believe a certain way. Because a real true story may present a moral dilemma or a moral resolution during the story, but it leads it up to the person watching or reading the story to decide for themselves whether or not they want to believe that or incorporate it into who they are, or to learn from it, or to reject it. Not being told you have to buy into the agenda we're pushing. Parent says race swaps are no biggie for me because the character is going the same regardless. Gender swaps are horrible because you change the entire dynamic of the characters and story. I think changing the character in any way, shape, or form of what the intention was of the original creator, in my opinion, is not necessarily correct. Now, does it mean changing race or gender? Is that good or bad? No. In my opinion, I don't care about any of that. Like I said, I can't tell the difference between humans anyway. But the problem I have with it is what the reasoning behind it. Is it done to further the story? Is it to tell a good story? Or in this case, is it done to push an agenda? That's what ultimately the problem I have with it. And that's with any IP, not just Star Wars, Doctor Who, Star Trek, you name it. Anyone's out there that has gone woke, it's because they're pushing that woke agenda, that gender politics, the critical theories that are just, in my opinion, should not be in a story. You can tell a good story without having that stuff in there. And that's all I really want. I just want a good story. I want Star Wars to be like what Star Wars was, that it was a good story. Regardless if I didn't like parts of the story or not, I wasn't pulled out of the story because of some agenda that was being pushed. Instead, I was sucked into the story more. That's why we watch and read the things and consume the things in pop culture that we do, is because we want to hear a good story. We want to feel something from it. We don't want to be told how to live our lives. We just want to connect with it in a different way. Or maybe not connect with it, but just to unplug and be immersed in the overall story. Oh, I agree with that, but you would have to be asking the question of why would they do that? It's not that they did it. Is there a reason for that? And what the reasoning behind it? If it doesn't go with telling a good story, then why do it? At least in my opinion. All right. Well, anyway, I'm going to wrap up here. We've been going for, almost 3 hours. I wasn't expecting it to be this long, but this has been good. And I am a Star Wars geeky penguin. And later on tonight, I will be giving my live review and reaction to episode 3 of season 1 of the new Ahsoka series. So you're more than welcome to join me in on that channel when I go live with that to discuss that. So forth. I'll give you my penguin thoughts on all that as well. And but anyway, I am the crazy little geeky Star Wars penguin, and may the force be with you, because I'm out of here so we can go make sure that the Gungans aren't like destroying things, because the Banthas don't really like them, because they step in their poodoo all the time for some weird reason. I think it's because the Gungans just don't pay attention to what they're doing. Anyway, talk to you later, and thanks, Joseph, for subscribing. And we'll see you guys around next time. May the fish be with you.